Chapter 595. What was a spy? Spying in the dark was a spy. If the magicians who were used to delivering women could discover them, then they wouldn't be spies. As for the inspection, that was the job of the sentry. It had to be known that there was a wide road leading to the inner castle moat, and there were still 20 magicians guarding there. The only thing they had to worry about was when the sentry would change shifts. They could only hope that it would be as long as possible, otherwise they would be immediately exposed. Hiding on the bank of the inner castle moat, Ji Dong nodded to Du Ming. Du Ming immediately understood. With a flash, he had already reached the riverbank. In the middle of the night, his and Ji Dong's figures were the easiest to hide. This was because Ji Dong's ultimate fire was black, which could completely cover his body. Adding on the power of his soul, even if they were close by, they wouldn't be able to discover them. His ninth water magical power was also black in its normal form, so his situation wasn't much different from Ji Dong's. Du Ming dipped his hand into the water, and with the help of Ji Dong's soul power, he quickly returned to Ji Dong's side. He transmitted his voice to Du Ming. "We can't go in the water, it's poisonous, and there are at least 100 water magical beasts below the 8th rank." This was the mission that Ji Dong had given him, which was for him to scout. Obviously, the result wasn't optimistic. With Ji Dong's soul sharing, although Du Ming was only transmitting his voice to him, everyone could hear it. Lang Tianyi said, "Young master, why don't we go underground again?" With his previous experience, he was now very confident. Ji shook her head and said, "That's not appropriate. The inner castle is the true, divine temple of darkness. It's different from the outside. Even though I'm only guessing, I'm almost certain that if we go underground, there will definitely be quite a problem." At this point, he looked at Tianji and nodded. "It seems like we can only take a risk and try. We must enter the city from the front. Everyone follow me. Little girl, I'll have to trouble you for a while." The last sentence was for Embark. Ji Dong raised his hand and put Embark into his vermilion bird bracelet. Although ordinary storage magic tools couldn't store living things, this wasn't a problem for Ji Dong. The vermilion bird bracelet had been modified by him and the vermilion bird bracelet, so it was already a large space that could be used for survival. Of course, if one stayed inside for a long time, they would probably die of loneliness, but it was not a problem to use it to temporarily store people. After putting Mo away, Ji Dong's figure flashed, and he was the first to float out. Jin and Chun Sichuan followed closely behind. The others moved in a line, with Lang Tianyi and Tianji at the back. Under Ji Dong's lead, the group of 10 quickly approached the pier. They could clearly see the 20 magic masters at the pier. They were all 6-crown magic masters. What was more troublesome was that these patrolling magic masters were on guard, so they were all riding their own magic beasts. Their overall strength wasn't strong, but it was very difficult to kill them without attracting the attention of the inner castle. Without asking, the Heavenly Stem Holy Disciples could guess that among the guards of the inner castle, there must be people constantly watching the situation at the pier. Everyone hid 100 meters away from the pier. Ji Dong called Tianji and Chun Sichuan to his side and whispered something to them. The two of them nodded at the same time. Ji Dong then turned to the other Heavenly Stem Holy Disciples and said, "If our operation fails, then we can only attack. Everyone, get into formation at once, and we will face them head-on." When he said this, he was already full of killing intent. Through soul detection, everyone had already discovered that there was already a large number of footsteps coming from about 1,000 meters away. Clearly, the Taoist woman's people were coming. Ji Dong grabbed Tianji's and Chun Sichuan's hands respectively. The three of them became one, and their soul power instantly completed the process of merging. In the next moment, his silver demon domain of illusions quietly opened, and streaks of silver light surged out from the ground. The strength of the spirit demon domain depended on the strength of the user's soul. Therefore, in a sense, this silver demon domain of illusions was the strongest of Ji Dong's 3 demon domains. Moreover, he was still in the process of merging his soul with Tianji and Chun Sichuan. With his soul power at the peak of the saint level, even if Tianji used his demon domain, he would not be much stronger than him. The streaks of silver light quietly spread out without a trace. In the blink of an eye, they had already arrived below the 20 demon masters guarding the dock. Neither the demon masters nor the magical beasts, whose senses should be far more sensitive than the demon masters, sensed anything. In the next moment, gentle soul power suddenly floated up, and almost in an instant, it forcibly covered the bodies of the 20 demon masters and their mounts. However, the most difficult thing for Jidong was that when his silver demon domain of illusions covered these people and magical beasts, they did not feel anything at all. Everything around them seemed to have not changed at all, and everything seemed normal. Not only did they not notice, but the people in the inner castle also did not feel anything wrong here. In fact, including the dock, as well as the area with a diameter of 100 meters outside the dock, it had been completely covered by Jidong's powerful spiritual demon domain. Everything that was shown to the outside world was also under his control. It's done. Jidong waved his fist. Even he did not expect that the silver demon domain of illusions, which was activated by the soul power at the peak of the saint level, could be so easily blocked. His seemingly simple action, in fact, had to accomplish many things at the same time. Not only did he have to confuse the demon masters and magical beasts, he also had to perfectly block the detection of the saint level from the 4 sentry towers in the inner castle. Creating an illusion in front of the detection of the saint level without being discovered was far more difficult than just using soul power to protect everyone's body. It could be said that Jidong had completely turned this space in front of him into a world that belonged to him. As long as his soul power was enough, anyone who entered this special world would be able to see what he wanted the people outside to see and feel what he wanted the people inside to feel. Just as Jidong finished all this, in the distance, about a dozen female demon masters, led by 20 demon masters, walked over. To Jidong's surprise, among these female demon masters, there was Auntie Mo, whom he had already warned. She was the spy of the Tianji Resistance Organization. Why did she still come? Jidong frowned slightly. He did not wish to see such a situation. No matter what, there were 10 Supremes in the inner castle. Moreover, since these Supremes could become Dark Tianji's most trusted subordinates, their cultivation and abilities would definitely not be as simple as those Supremes in the Chamber of Commerce. Moreover, in the core area of the Darkness Temple, there were many formations that could assist them. If they really fought, Jidong would definitely not be able to take care of her. The Heavenly Stem holy disciples all looked at Hyoheim with questioning eyes. A sharp light flashed in Jidong's eyes, and he said, "Let's go." Since they were already here, he couldn't let a single person affect the entire operation. Darkness Tianji wasn't here, and he didn't know that they had already infiltrated the 5 Elements continent. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and it would probably only come once. The Heavenly Stem holy disciples quietly walked out. Under the cover of the silver demon territory of fantasy, they quickly arrived in front of the pier. Regardless of whether it was the 20 demon masters stationed at the pier or the dozens of male and female demon masters who were coming in a line, they could not see their existence at all. Very soon, the 20 male and female demon masters had already walked into the range of the silver demon territory of fantasy, but they did not feel anything. "Do it." Jidong gave the order without hesitation. The female demon masters who had been sent here for sexual pleasure did not feel anything at all. They had already been isolated by the silver demon territory of fantasy. However, the male demon masters suddenly felt that their surroundings had changed drastically. They were actually in an illusory space. Immediately after, an incomparably huge spiritual pressure erupted. When these male demon masters, who were generally 6 or 7 crowns, tried to gather their mana, they found that they could not concentrate at all. At this moment, whether it was the 20 demon masters at the pier or the people on the top of the inner castle, everything was the same as usual. The 20 demon masters who were guarding the pier were also coming over to check and hand over the job. There was no smell of blood at all. Jidong alone took care of the whole process of killing. Enveloped by the silver demon territory of fantasy released by his peak saint-level soul power, These 6 or 7 crowns demon masters did not even have a chance to resist and were all turned into ashes. The heavenly stem holy disciples also took their places. Under the disguise of the silvered demon territory of fantasy, they looked no different from the male demon masters who had been killed before. When the 20 demon masters came over to check, they did not know that the demon masters in front of them had already been replaced. Immersed in the illusion of the silver demon territory of fantasy, Ji-dong easily gave them a psychological hint that they had passed the check. When they made a hand gesture toward the top of the inner castle, the silver demon territory of fantasy quietly disappeared from the 20 demon masters guarding the pier. It only remained on the heavenly stem holy disciples, so that outsiders would see that they looked exactly the same as the 10 demon masters who had been killed before. The whole process actually took less than a minute, but in this short minute, Ji-dong had already led the heavenly stem holy disciples to complete an extremely exquisite and amazing substitution. Not to mention the dark demon masters, even the heavenly stem holy disciples were filled with disbelief at this moment. This was a substitution done under the nose of the other party. When Ji-dong passed this idea to them, they all agreed that it was impossible. However, when everything in front of them became reality, they realized that their understanding of Ji-dong was far from enough. Even Chun Sichuan found that her judgment of Ji-dong had begun to deviate. He was no longer the Ji-dong who needed her constant guidance. In the midst of the creaking sound, the wide and thick iron chain bridge slowly extended toward them from the direction of the inner castle. This iron chain bridge was usually hidden under the river and could only be tightened from the direction of the inner castle. There were also some complicated mechanisms set up which were all protected by magic formations. Even with the saint-level detection of Ji-dong and the others, it was difficult to detect them. In a short while, the iron chain bridge had been successfully connected to this side of the pier. Layers of iron plates were flipped up from the bottom, and the entire bridge was completed. Ji-dong and the others led the dozen gorgeously dressed and gorgeous female demon masters towards the direction of the inner castle. Beside Ji-dong was Mo-er's aunt, the gorgeous woman with an extremely outstanding figure. She was also the one who walked in front of the other women. "Didn't I tell you not to come to the inner castle?" Ji-dong's telepathic message quietly crept into the gorgeous woman's ears. The gorgeous woman's footsteps staggered slightly. However, being able to hide so deeply meant that her mental fortitude was naturally extremely shocking. After a short moment of shock, she immediately recovered and used the opportunity to tidy up her hair to send a telepathic message to Ji-dong, who was beside her. "You? How'd you do it? This disguise technique is too shocking. I can even feel that your aura has completely changed into that of a different person." Of course, she could not see through the method Ji-dong had used to change his appearance. "You don't need to know that. The road isn't long. Hurry up and tell me why you're here." Ji-dong's voice clearly became colder. If this woman's purpose was to harm them, then no matter how great she was, Ji-dong would never gamble with the safety of his companions. "I'm here to help you. My name is Furong. You can call me by my name. Although there are no traps in the inner castle, there are matrices almost everywhere. Later, when you enter the door, you will definitely be exposed. There's an identification matrix there. Once it discovers that the Magic Master's identity card does not match your identity, it will immediately call the police. Then, the inner castle's defensive matrix will be activated. There are 6 purple-robed great wizards in the inner castle today. If you want to succeed, then you must cut off the effects of the various matrices in the inner castle, at least temporarily." At this point, there was clearly some anxiety in her voice as she said, "When I went back just now, I thought about it carefully. With the many defensive matrices in the inner castle, I'm afraid that even if you're saints, you won't be able to do anything. Furthermore, even if you're able to kill them amidst the many defensive matrices, it will still be useless. This is because I heard from that old thing that no matter where Dark Heavenly Secrets is, once the inner castle is attacked, the matrices will send a message to inform him in time. He can then use a special method to teleport over in a very short period of time." "Then why didn't you say so earlier?" Jidong's voice became even colder. If he had known about this situation, then all of their actions would have been different. At the very least, they would have carried out a deeper investigation of the inner castle before taking action. Chapter 596. Hibiscus smiled bitterly. Who would have guessed that you would be so powerful to be able to do this without anyone noticing? I only told you the time to send people into the castle because I wanted to test you. If you really dare to come, it would prove that you have sufficient confidence in your own abilities and are sufficiently persistent in your beliefs. Only then would you be worthy of our full cooperation. If you didn't come, it would prove that you were too cautious, and if you weren't careful, we would definitely be implicated. As such, I had no choice but to be more careful. I had originally planned to immediately send a signal for you to retreat if I discovered that you were going to attack this side. Who knew that you would actually become our Demon Master escort without anyone noticing? Hurry up! We'll reach the inner castle if we go any further. If we don't leave now, it'll be too late. Although we've let go of this opportunity, I'll definitely tell Shanlei as soon as possible and send a message to the higher-ups of the organization. We have complete trust in your all-round cooperation. Jidong said coldly, I admire you for hiding in the divine temple at all costs. However, you dared to use our safety as a test. This is unforgivable. Do you know that the secrets of the heavens are not in the divine temple, and that you don't know that we've already entered the darkness continent? This is the only chance for you. The murderous aura that Jidong released uncontrollably caused a strong chill to rise from the bottom of Hibiscus's heart. She could not even be sure if this man would kill her in the next moment. She also realized the severity of this matter and could not help but be at a loss for what to do. After hiding in the divine temple for such a long time, Hibiscus's character was extremely distrustful of everyone. Even though Shanlei had already told her that Jidong's group could basically be trusted, she still wanted to use her own method to evaluate them after knowing that Jidong's group had successfully arrived here. However, she had never expected that these righteous heavenly disciples would actually have such unfathomable abilities to be able to arrive in front of them without anyone noticing. It was precisely because of her test that it was very likely that they would lose this important opportunity. However, at this moment, she did not know what to do. Jidong quickly made a decision after thinking for a while. They were less than 20 meters away from the open gates of the inner castle. At this point, he had no time to hesitate or think. If there's a next time, don't blame me for making sure your organization won't be spared, he said. After saying this to Hibiscus, Jidong quickly communicated with his companions. At this moment, he had already made a decision. He could not give up on the opportunity in front of him. Aren't you guys going to retreat? Hibiscus looked at Jidong in shock. At this moment, she had even forgotten to hide her emotions. Jidong glanced at her coldly. Only then did she realize that she had lost her composure. She hurriedly calmed herself down, but her heart was beating even faster. Her body was also trembling slightly. As she tried to hide her emotions, she hurriedly sent a voice transmission to Hyoheim. You guys have to leave. This is too dangerous. You don't have any chance at all. Once the dark heavenly secrets returns, you're dead meat. Hurry up and leave. I admit that it's all my fault. I'm willing to use my life to give you an explanation. However, you guys have to leave immediately. You're not only the last chance of the Five Elements mainland, but also the last chance of our organization. If there was medicine for regret in this world, Hibiscus would definitely take 100 portions. However, looking at Jidong's unwavering expression, or rather, Jidong's unchanging expression in the form of the dark demon, she did not know what to do. Once all the light saints in front of her were annihilated, she would not be able to redeem herself no matter how much she thought about it. Unfortunately, she did not even have many chances to regret. This was because at this moment, everyone had already arrived at the gates of the inner castle of the Darkness Temple. There were 10 seven-crowned demon masters guarding there. 10 pairs of eyes were staring at them. These demon masters' gazes were mostly on Hibiscus's voluptuous figure. From time to time, they would reveal looks of greed. However, Hibiscus knew that once Jidong and the rest stepped into the impenetrable defensive formation in front of the gates, everything would be over. Calm your mind. You'll fall into a coma in a while. When you wake up, you can continue to be a spy. Jidong's calm voice rang in Hibiscus's ears. Before she could understand what was going on, all of a sudden, Jidong took a step forward, followed by the heavenly stem saints who were disguised as dark demon masters. Other than Tianji, the 9 of them formed a circle with Jidong as the starting point. Jidong raised his arms and pressed his hands on the shoulders of Chun Sichuan and Yao Qianshu, who had come to his side. The heavenly stem saints instantly connected into a whole according to the order of the 5 elements. Even at this time, the 7-crowned dark demon masters who were guarding the door still did not notice anything wrong. Jidong and the others had not yet stepped into the inner castle. What everyone saw now was still the normal situation under the silver demon domain of fantasy. The only change that could be seen was Hibiscus, whom Jidong deliberately let her see. Although Jidong was angry about Hibiscus's distrust, he could understand it. After all, they came from the 5 Elements continent. It was not easy to make the Tianji organization trust them. Therefore, he wanted Hibiscus to see clearly what they were doing. He did not want to encounter the trouble caused by distrust like today again. What Hibiscus saw was a layer of milky white luster rippling out from Jidong's body. Immediately after, the bodies of all the heavenly stems saints bloomed with the same luster. It was the same milky white luster, but it showed different forms. The milky white luster on Jidong's body was in the form of a flame. The milky white luster on Yao Qianshu and Chun Sichuan's bodies was like a tall and straight tree trunk and a spiraling vine. The milky white luster on every heavenly stem saint's body was completely compatible with their attributes. It looked very strange. This is... Hibiscus's eyes widened as she stared at the scene in front of her. Could it be that this was the legendary? The heavenly stems saints used reality to prove her guess. In the next moment, all the milky white luster had already condensed into one. A magic formation formed completely by this milky white luster appeared out of thin air above the heads of the heavenly stem saints. The name of this magic formation was called condensation. The condensation magic formation was a condensation magic formation formed by the power of chaos. The fire of chaos, the wood of chaos, the soil of chaos, the metal of chaos, and the water of chaos. The scene of the 5 great mysteries of chaos fusing in an instant might not even happen once in 1,000 years in this world. When the condensation magic formation formed completely by the milky white light appeared, Jidong's dreamy silver demon territory instantly disintegrated. No demon territory would have any effect in the face of this demonic power that could steal the fortune of heaven and earth. The entire darkness divine temple shook violently. Within the miraculous range, regardless of whether it was the moat in the inner castle or the huge moat outside, all the water instantly rose by more than 10 meters. The entire darkness divine temple also shook violently, as if there was an earthquake. The 10 guards at the entrance of the inner castle cried out involuntarily. The female enchanters who were brought to serve the enchanters of the inner castle widened their eyes in shock. Some of the more careless ones even fell into the lake due to the violent tremors. Who would have thought that such a huge change would occur so suddenly? This was completely beyond the scope of their understanding. Unfortunately, the truth would not change according to one's will. The condensation magic formation that rose into the air shone with white light, and the first thing it shrouded was the Shrine of Darkness. In the air, various elements of different attributes surged wildly, especially in the inner castle. The 4 saint-level probes almost stopped in an instant. Extremely rich elements of the 10 attributes rushed towards the condensation magic formation. As soon as they came into contact with the condensation magic formation, they were immediately melted without the slightest possibility of resisting. What's going on? Loud shouts rang out from the inner castle. Their deep voices showed their powerful strength. However, they only shouted once. In the next moment, they immediately quietened down. This was because they had to do their best to control their mana so that it would not be stripped away by the terrifying chaotic power. How could they dare to make another sound? As for the magicians around the saints, whether it was the seven-crowned magician guarding the gate or the female magicians, the magic power in their bodies was stripped clean in an instant. They completely became sacrifices for the all-attribute chaotic magic formation. The essence of chaos was creation, not destruction. Therefore, no matter how much mana was absorbed by the chaotic power, it would only quietly melt away the mana. It would not condense into a powerful offensive skill. However, who said that creation could not be effective? When Ji Dong listened to Fu Rong's explanation of the general situation in the inner castle, he immediately thought of the time when he and Yao Qianshu had entered the mist forest to find the mysterious treasure that contained the inheritance of the five elements magic formation. He had almost been destroyed because of his dual attributes. At that time, it was the chaotic flame that had saved him. Although he only had a little chaotic embryonic form at that time, it was this chaotic embryonic form that allowed him to draw out all the mana of the various attributes from the crypt and assimilate them with the chaotic ignorance. No matter what kind of magic formation was activated, it would undoubtedly require mana as support. Could a magic formation that had lost its mana still be called a magic formation? Without a doubt, if the magic formations in the inner castle of the Darkness Shrine could be activated at any time, they would have to be supported by sufficient mana. This was definitely not done by enchanters. If that was the case, it would require countless high-level enchanters, and the loss would not make up for the gain. Therefore, Ji Dong immediately determined that the source of mana for the magic formations had to be the crystallized cores of magical beasts. It should be known that the crystallized cores of high-ranking magical beasts not only contained a large amount of mana, but could also absorb mana from the air to replenish itself. It was the most suitable energy storage for any magic formation. Ji Dong didn't want to give up on the opportunity in front of him. Just like what he had said to Hibiscus, there would only be one chance like this. If he gave it up, then they would never have such a good opportunity again. How could he be satisfied if he didn't give it a try? Ji Dong had already thought it through. If their attempt was unsuccessful, they would definitely be able to retreat immediately. If Dark Tianji wanted to teleport back from the Evil Island, he would first have to be notified here, and then there would be a teleportation process. With this short period of time, they would be able to teleport to the temporary teleportation point 250 kilometers away, and then teleport to the city where Shan lay and the rest were. Therefore, Ji Dong decided to take the risk. Previously, a single chaotic flame could devour so much mana. What about the five elements magic formation that had 10 attributes and was created with the yin-yang world as the foundation? What kind of scene would it be? The Heavenly Stem Saints had never tried this method before. With the help of Ji Dong and the Heaven Jade, they all had their own chaotic profundity. However, it was their first time using it. Most of the Heavenly Stem Saints did not even know how to release the chaotic energy. It was completely under the guidance of Ji Dong and the activation of the five elements magic formation that formed the scene in front of them. However, this scene was also unforgettable for them. Under the effect of the five elements magic formation, the first thing to disappear was the black fog that had covered the Darkness Shrine for many years. As long as it was energy, it could not escape the range of the five elements. These poisons were also a type of energy and also contained some soul power. In an instant, they were devoured by the chaos magic formation that was getting larger and larger. Fortunately, it was nighttime. Even without the black fog, the Darkness Shrine was still indistinct from afar. Then, it was the support energy of all the array designs in the Darkness Temple. Just as Ji Dong had predicted, apart from a few human-controlled array designs, most of the defense array designs were supported by the crystallic cores of magical beasts. Once they needed to be activated, they could trigger the crystallic cores to release mana and activate the array design through some activation array designs. A large amount of mana from the crystallic cores was extracted in an instant and surged out like a flood. In particular, the dense mana that was extracted from the inner castle, which was the closest to it, seemed to be substantial. The multicolored radiance formed a huge rainbow-like pillar of light in the sky that continuously rose into the chaos magic formation of the 5 elements and disappeared. Hibiscus's body slowly fell to the ground. The mana in her body had been completely extracted. She widened her eyes at everything that was happening in front of her and shouted in her heart, "Oh my God, is this really something that can be done by humans? Chaos, it's really chaos." The heavenly stem saints have actually grasped chaos of all attributes. Chapter 597. The moment before she fainted, Hibiscus's heart was still filled with regret. If she had known that the Saints of Radiance possessed the chaos attribute, she would not have dared to test them like this. At the same time, Jidong injected a trace of soul power into his vermilion bird bracelet. Hibiscus had fainted, and he wanted Mo to witness the entire process. Since he was going to cooperate with the Heavenly Secrets Organization, he had to ensure that today's situation of distrust would not happen again. Shock lingered in the hearts of every Heavenly Stem Saint, including Jidong. No one could have imagined that the effect of having the chaos attribute would be so terrifying. There is no doubt that there were countless arrays in the Dark Temple, and no one knew how much mana was enshrouded in it. But even so, the profound chaos that they released together made the tens of thousands of demon masters in the entire Dark Temple not dare to act rashly. All the demon masters below the level of 8 crowns who were nearby had their mana sucked out in a breath's time. Those who were below the level of 7 crowns had all fainted after losing their mana. Even those demon masters above the level of 8 crowns could only concentrate on condensing their own mana to isolate themselves from the suction of the chaos attribute. Not to mention attacking Jidong and the others, it was already quite good to ensure that their mana did not leak out. It could be said that with the 5 elements chaos array, the Saints of Radiance had restrained the entire Dark Temple. Jidong felt that it was a pity. If there was a strong enough force that could break into the Dark Temple, one could imagine the damage it could bring to the Dark Demon Masters. He only had one purpose in activating the 5 elements chaos array, and that was to suck out all the mana in the Dark Temple, so that the Dark Demon Masters here could not contact the Heavenly Secrets Organization. Reality proved that he had succeeded. The 10 elements in the air were swept away, but the huge amount of mana contained in the Dark Temple also shocked the Saints. It took a full 2 hours for all the mana to be absorbed, and this did not include the 8 and 9 crown mages who were resisting the absorption of the chaotic force. Moreover, it would not be long before the mana in the outside world would start to replenish the mages and crystal cores that had lost their mana as the airflow changed. However, this amount of time was more than enough for the Saints. Under Jidong's command, the 9 of them dispersed their chaos profundities at the same time. They had gained a whole new understanding of their own chaos profundities. Let's go. Jidong's soul power exploded in an instant, spreading to every corner of the inner castle. Since they had been exposed, his soul power this time contained a strong pressure. The soul power of a middle stage saint was not only used for detection, but also as a trigger. He wanted to see if there were any other arrays that could be activated. Reality proved that the chaotic force's indiscriminate extraction of elements was very powerful. Under the scan of the soul power, there was not a single array that could be activated. In other words, without the control of the mages, all the defensive and offensive arrays in the inner castle had been completely paralyzed. This was also what Jidong wanted to see the most. In a flash, everyone had already rushed into the inner castle. Without the concealment of the arrays, there was no need for Heaven's Secrets to investigate. Jidong had already discovered the location of the 2 light water divine weapons. The disappearance of the chaotic force had also caused the entire inner castle to move. The powerful mages that lived here, as well as the dark magicians who were at least 8 crowns and above, who still had mana, rushed over at an unparalleled speed. Tianyi, Ajin, you 2 guard the gates of the inner castle. Do not let anyone in. After leaving the 2 9 crowns holy disciples behind, Jidong quickly led the others into the inner castle to protect it. There was no time to observe the situation in the inner castle. Jidong used his soul power to investigate and went straight into the depths of the inner castle. Ajin and cruel Tianyi stayed at the gates of the inner castle. Just as Lang Tianyi stood still, Ajin had already moved. With a light flick of her foot, she kicked all the female mages that had come to serve her into the moat. Because the magical beasts in the water were too close, they had already lost their mana from the absorption just now. This was to protect Hibiscus life. Otherwise, Ajin would have directly killed these female mages that she hated the most. As for the male mages that had been guarding the dock and the gates of the inner castle, they were not so lucky. Lang Tianyi guarded the gates, while Ajin flashed back and forth like a golden ray of light. In just a dozen breaths' time, she was already standing beside Lang Tianyi. In her hands, there were dozens of 6 crowns and 7 crowns dark crystal crowns. In terms of power, Jidong was undoubtedly the strongest among the Heavenly Stem holy disciples. However, in terms of speed and methods of killing, even Jidong could not compare to Ajin. She had half the bloodline of the dragon clan in her body, so she would definitely not be indecisive when killing. In Ajin's world, there were only these 2 distinctions, and all enemies could be killed. Leaving 2 people to guard the gates, Jidong quickly led the Heavenly Stem holy disciples into the inner castle. This could be said to be the largest hall that Jidong had ever seen. There were stairs in front of them. Jidong led the Heavenly Stem holy disciples straight up the stairs. The 2 water divine weapons were in a sealed room at the top of the inner castle. That was also the place with the most matrices. Without the support of the crystal core's mana, these matrices were all exposed in Jidong's mind. He had no idea what the inner castle was made of. Miao Miao, who was not far behind Jidong, gave it a try. To her surprise, she discovered that even if she used the divine power in the staff of the goddess of earth, it would not be easy to completely destroy the inner castle. At the very least, it would be impossible for her to do so in a short amount of time. After several dozen steps, the group arrived at the 2nd floor very quickly. Over 10 red-robed dark magic masters were also coming over from the 2nd floor. Jidong could clearly sense that even more dark magic masters were rapidly approaching. There was not a single violet-robed high priest present, but it did not mean that the peak experts of the Darkness Shrine had been sucked dry by the chaotic force. Instead, it was because they lived in a higher place in the inner castle, so they were naturally not as fast as the red-robe high priests on the 2nd floor. At this point, Jidong knew that there was no other possibility. They could only fight it out. It would definitely take a long time for the dark magic masters to call Dark Tianyi back. First of all, most of the dark magicians in the inner castle didn't know what was going on. The appearance of the 5 elements chaos convergence array was so sudden and without any warning. Most of the dark magicians were still in a state of confusion. Given Darkness Tianyi's status, without confirming that he had to return, these dark magicians wouldn't immediately think of a way to invite him back. Instead, they had to figure out what was going on first. Otherwise, they would have to bear the wrath of Darkness Tianyi. Jidong and the others had just used chaotic force to paralyze all the formations. If they wanted to send a message to Dark Tianyi, they would have to first replenish the mana of the information formation. This would take a certain amount of time, and with the time it would take for Dark Tianyi to return, he definitely would not be able to return in a short period of time. It was precisely because of this mentality that Jidong led the Heavenly Stem Saints to charge in openly. What he wanted to do was to obtain the 2 water element divine weapons before Dark Tianyi received the message and returned. Even if they did not kill any more dark Heavenly Stem Saints, they had already achieved their goal. The Godfire Saint Ruler armor had already covered Jidong's body. The Heavenly Stem Saints behind him dispersed. Only this could allow them to use their strength at the same time. Even though they were facing a dozen or so 8-crown dark magic masters, the Heavenly Stem Saints were no longer the same as before. Other than the 2 9-crown dark magic masters, everyone else had reached the 8-crown dark magic master level, except for Du Ming. Furthermore, there was also Jidong, the Heavenly Stem Saint Ruler who had a saint-tier body and soul. The Flying Snake Flash was used immediately. What the Heavenly Stem Saints needed the most right now was time. Without releasing the mana in his body, Jidong's body shot forward like a cannonball. The two dark magic masters at the front hurriedly gathered mana, but they did not have time to release it. They could only use all their mana to circulate it to their arms in an attempt to block Jidong's attack. Although these 8-crown dark magic masters still had the ability to fight, their reaction speed and physical strength could not compare to the purple-robe high priest when they had released the profound primal chaos. A portion of their mana had been absorbed to varying degrees, and their average strength was only left with about 70%. And when Jidong attacked, he released the soul suppression and the ultimate magic attribute suppression without hesitation. These 8-crown dark magic masters' condition in battle was immediately reduced by another 20%. When Jidong got close to them, they could not gather much mana at all. He separated his hands and placed them on the arms of the two dark magic masters that were blocking him. Jidong did not stop. His body flipped in the air and swept over their heads. The bodies of the two dark magic masters exploded like tomatoes in the next moment. Their flesh and blood splattered everywhere and turned into flames that burned intensely in the air. Jidong waved his hands, and the flames that were burning the corpses in the air had already gathered. The ultimate dual fire instantly condensed into two huge fireballs. Under his powerful compression, they condensed together and brazenly pushed out, smashing towards the center of the other 8-crown dark magic masters. These 8-crown red-robed high priests could live in the inner castle. Obviously, they were deeply trusted by dark divination. Their own strength was also quite strong. After paying the price of 2 of their companions, these dark magic masters immediately reacted. If the opponent dared to directly attack the Dark Temple, how could his strength be ordinary? They did not seek to injure the enemy, but to protect themselves first. The remaining dozen or so red-robed high priests actually gathered all their attributes. In an instant, the 5 elements enchantment of 10 elements of magic instantly unfolded, turning into a multicolored light screen, blocking the path of the saints. It should be known that this was the 5 elements enchantment of 10 8-crown demon masters. Although they could not turn it into an offensive ability, in terms of defense, it was still extraordinary. Seeing this situation, even Jidong could not help but frown. These 8-crown red-robe high priests had reacted so quickly and could accurately judge the situation in such a panic situation. Just this alone was enough to show their respective strength. In the midst of the loud bang, the ultimate dual fireballs that Jidong released had already exploded on the 5 elemental boundary. The violent roar was deafening in the inner castle. However, even this tyrannically compressed ultimate dual fireball of Jidong could not blow up the 5 elemental boundary of 10 8-crown red-robed high priests. It could only cause ripples of light on the 5 elemental boundary. Of course, the 8-crown dark magic masters inside did not look good. They desperately increased the output of magic to maintain the tyrannical defense of the 5 elemental boundary. "Let's go," Jidong shouted. He flicked his fingers, and countless scale-like flames floated out. "Didn't you want to defend? Fine, then I'll let you defend." Their purpose in killing the saints was not to fight to the death with these people. This 5 elemental boundary of 10 attributes was jointly used by the 8-crown red-robed high priests. Even ordinary primary ultimate skill could be blocked. If they wanted to kill them, they would have to spend a huge amount of magic. Jidong did not think that wasting time here was the right choice. Although this 5 elemental boundary was good, it could only be used for passive defense. It was not like the 5 elements mutual generation circle formation, which could turn defense into offense. "Weren't you as hard as a tortoise's shell? Fine, I'll ignore you." Yao Qianshu, who was following behind, had already collected the darkness crystal crown dropped by the 2 killed red-robed high priests. Everyone followed Jidong and continued to rush upwards. The 5 elemental boundary of the red-robed high priests stood firm under the bombardment of the dragon scale flash. Naturally, they could not catch up with them immediately. Moreover, they might not dare to get too close. The two companions who were killed in an instant previously made these red-robed high priests tremble. With their strength and status, they cherish life far more than ordinary people. Who will one die? The Darkness Temple's inner castle had a total of 9 floors. The lower 7 floors were occupied by dark magicians. The 7th floor was occupied by the purple-robed high priests, while the remaining red-robed high priests lived below the 7th floor. As for the 8th and 9th floors, they belonged to the Darkness Heavenly Stem Saints and Darkness Tianji respectively. Darkness Tianji had 5 Darkness Demon armies. Only one remained here, but the number of red-robed high priests was far more than 10. In addition to the red-robed high priests of this Darkness Demon army, there was also a group of red-robed high priests who specialized in assisting Darkness Tianji. Chapter 598. Without the protection of the formation, the inner castle was like a woman who had taken off her clothes for Jidong. The information given by Hibiscus was correct. There were 6 9-crowned purple-robed high priests in the inner castle, but the number of 8-crowned red-robed high priests surprised Jidong. There were more than 50 people in total. 58 crowned devil masters. Even the Devil Guild headquarters could not produce such a number in the 5 Elements continent. In addition to the 15 8-crowned devil masters who had stopped them just now, the remaining 30 or so 8-crowned devil masters and the 6 purple-robed high priests were rushing over quickly. This did not include the dark magicians who had rushed over from outside the Dark Temple after realizing that something was wrong. The magic power of the dark magicians below 7 crown in the Dark Temple had been drained, but there were still those outside the Dark Temple. The sudden change just now had shocked the entire dark magician army within 100 miles of the Dark Temple. The reason why Ji Dong left Jin and Duming behind was to prepare to break out of the encirclement and to stop the reinforcements. But even without reinforcements, it was still extremely difficult for them to fight against so many experts in the Dark Temple. The only thing that made Ji Dong relax a little was that the 6 purple-robed high priests were all rushing over from above without exception, and none of them intended to contact Dark Tianji. After all, Ji Dong did not know the actual situation in the Dark Temple. They were suddenly attacked, and even rushed into the inner castle. If Dark Tianji knew about this, it would be a disaster for the dark magicians here. Therefore, what they wanted to do now was to solve the problem immediately and then inform Dark Tianji. In this way, even if there was a punishment, it was still bearable under the circumstances of reducing the losses as much as possible. If they directly asked Dark Tianji to come back and solve the problem himself, let alone the red-robed high priests, even the purple-robed high priests would not be able to bear the anger of Dark Tianji. Therefore, what they wanted to do now was to go all out to destroy Ji Dong and the others. These dark magicians did not think that anyone could compete with so many experts at the same time. As soon as he stepped into the 3rd floor, Ji Dong saw the figure of the purple-robed high priestess floating down, accompanied by dozens of red-robed high priestesses. Meanwhile, behind them, the dozen or so red-robed high priests had already caught up, surrounding the 8 of them. The true test for the holy apostles of light had finally arrived. Ji Dong's eyes shone brightly. Even when facing a martial sage, or even a high-level fire demon king, he wasn't afraid at all, let alone these dark magicians in front of him. Soul suppression, Ji Dong shouted. Next, Tianji and Chun Sichuan quickly stepped forward. The 3 of them combined their soul powers once again, and the demonic illusory silver domain bloomed at the same time, enveloping everyone within it. The release of the demonic domain enveloped the enemies, including 6 supreme martial artists and nearly 58 crowned divine masters. This was an unprecedented feat in the history of the Devil Master world. However, Ji Dong had accomplished it by relying on the soul cultivation of the 3 of them at the peak of the martial sage level. At the same time, he also sent a message to Jin and Duming. However, no matter how powerful the soul power that Ji Dong could control was, he was ultimately not a god. He was still a human, and martial sage experts were also humans, not as powerful as gods who could control heaven and earth. Therefore, under the situation where so many experts were enveloped, All he could do was use the demonic illusory silver domain to prevent all the devil masters within its range, including those supreme martial artists, from releasing their respective demonic domains. In other words, the demonic illusory silver domain had now become a restricted demonic domain in an uncontrollable battlefield. The enemies were simply too powerful. Moreover, there were already 20 red-robed high priests who had set up 2 5-elements boundaries in front of them, and the 5-elements boundary behind them was still present. Those purple-robe high priests were clearly determined not to let a single one of them escape. Apart from underestimating the number of red-robed high priests, Jidong had already predicted the situation in front of him. This was also a situation that they had to face, and there were no other possibilities. It could be said that with the power of chaos, they had cut off all the mysteries in the Darkness Temple. What they had to face was only the highest level magic master here. They could not have done any better. However, what they had to face was, after all, the most powerful magic master who was equivalent to more than 1/5 of the magic masters in the Darkness Continent. If they did not take into account the secrets of the heavens, it could even be considered as 2/5 of the power of the 8 crown magic masters in the Darkness Continent. How could it be so easy to fight against it? The arrangement of these purple-robed high priests was clearly to use the red-robed high priests to trap them and prevent them from escaping. Then, the 6 purple-robed high priests would personally kill Jidong and the others. As long as they could kill these intruders, they would be able to restore everything to normal before Dark Tianji returned. By then, it would be much easier to explain. A cold smile spread from the corner of Jidong's mouth. He gave an order through spiritual communication, and the holy disciples of light followed Jidong, lead, and released their yin-yang crowns at the same time. 7 yin-yang crowns were released at the same time, and each of them was qualitatively different from the dark magic masters present. It was not only because of the ultimate mana, but also because of the golden light that represented light. That was something that none of the dark magic masters possessed. When they saw the golden light that they had never seen before, all the dark demon masters present couldn't help but be stunned. In their minds, only the word light appeared. Along with this word, there was also an incomparable shock. When people were shocked, there would always be a moment of delay in their reactions, and that was exactly what Jidong wanted. An incomparably dense black and white light surged in an instant, and the roar of a dragon resounded. The 8 figures, including Tianji, leaped onto the massive black and white light the moment it appeared. That black and white figure was just too enormous, actually forcibly pushing aside the astonished red-robed high priest a bit, including the 2 5-elements boundaries in front of it. The 5 elemental boundaries could defend against mana attacks, but they could not react in time to the sudden increase in size, so they could only be pushed back. By the time they reacted, the massive black and white figure had already turned into a stream of light and suddenly passed through. Without a doubt, this huge figure that had suddenly appeared was the sacred evolution fire dragon. Even though the inner castle of the Dark Temple was huge, the sudden appearance of such a huge figure still caused the staircase to become crowded. It was no wonder that the demon masters had been pushed aside. The sacred evolution fire dragon immediately activated its innate skill, traversal. So what if it was the 5 elements boundary? After all, it could not seal off the entire path in front of it. Furthermore, the sacred evolution fire dragon was extremely powerful. Once it traversed through the staircase, it brought Jidong and the others with it and appeared behind the demon masters who were trying to stop it. The dark magic masters could not have imagined that this would happen. By the time they recovered from their shock, the sacred evolution fire dragon was already at the 4th floor of the staircase behind them. Oh no! A few purple-robe high priests shouted angrily at the same time and immediately turned around. Among the 8 figures of the light heavenly stem saints, 5 leaped up and went straight to the higher floors of the inner castle. The sacred evolution fire dragon's massive body had already turned around and blocked the entire path. There were still 3 people left on the back of the sacred evolution fire dragon. They all stood at the position where the Yatai and Wu Yangye's necks were at. Jidong stood at the front, as though he could hold the pass alone. Chun Sixuan and Yao Qianshu stood on either side of him, each raising a hand and pressing it on Jidong's shoulder. Their ultimate dual wood mana poured out without reservation. At the same time, their respective condensation arrays lit up behind them to fully support Jidong. Dual wood generates dual fire. All of a sudden, the situation changed. Jidong rode the sacred evolution fire dragon and stood at the highest point, while the purple-robed and red-robed high priests were blocked below. Before this, they had not expected things to turn out this way. Jidong smiled. Everything was developing according to his expectations. The higher they went, the more important the inner castle of the Darkness Temple would be. All the matrices had already been resolved by them. With Tianji leading the way, it was not difficult for Lan Bauer, Du Ming, and the rest to find the Water Divine weapon. What he needed to do now was to block these dark magic masters in front of him. Even if these dark magic masters wanted to inform Dark Tianji, it would be impossible. Without a doubt, the matrices that connected to Dark Tianji could not be below the 4th level. Everything was smoother than expected. Although the staircase was wide, it could not accommodate the attacks of dozens of dark magic masters at the same time. At this moment, Jidong had already combined his mana with the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon. He also had the support of the ultimate Dual Earth. Even if the dark magic masters appear in front of him, he was confident that he could hold them off for a while. A strange red light shone from Jidong's hands. The red light flashed and grew to 6 meters long before it condensed into the shape of a sword. At this moment, a surging cold, killing intent filled every corner of the Darkness Temple. The sword of the fire god had already appeared in Jidong's hands. It was as hot as magma from hell. Accompanied by the spiritual pressure of a high-level saint-rank soul, the dark magic masters that were charging at him were obviously stagnant. Without Tianji's soul fusion, Jidong still had Chen Xishuan, whom he was more familiar with. The bond between the two of them no longer needed to be communicated with words. No matter what Jidong did, he could rest assured and leave his back to her. She had never let him down. She had always been the perfect support. Because of the previous encirclement, the 6 purple-robed high priests were in the middle of the group of dark magic masters. At this moment, they turned around. The first to face Jidong were the red-robed priests behind the purple-robed high priest. The sword of the fire god swept out without any fancy moves. Like a huge whip, it swung towards the red-robed priests. A suffocating feeling rushed towards them. That was a divine weapon in the hands of the heavenly stem Holy King. It was also a trump card that Jidong rarely used. In the face of these dark magic masters, he would not show any mercy. He directly used the sword of the fire god. Back then, he had relied on this sword of the fire god to almost destroy the inheritance of Dark Tianji. At this time, with the help of the ultimate dual wood and the sacred evolution fire dragon, the current Jidong was even more different from the previous Jidong. This sword of the fire god swung out horizontally. Without the protection of the magical formation, the Darkness Temple's inner castle was filled with the incomparably rich aura of the god of fire. None of the dark mages thought that Jidong could casually burst out with a powerful attack that was equivalent to a high-level sure-kill skill. That wasn't the process of charging up at all. The terrifying mana fluctuations in the air trembled violently, and everyone in the surroundings trembled violently. When the red-robed high priests who were rushing at the front realized that something was wrong, it was already very difficult for them to respond adequately, especially the row at the front. They bore the brunt of the huge pressure of the sword of the fire god. All they could do was quickly release their mana weapons and pour all their mana into them. Not to mention these 8-crowned dark magic masters. Even the purple-robed high priest could not instantly release an attack at the level of a super ultimate skill. The red-robed high priests, with a deeper foundation, could at most throw out a scroll in an attempt to block the crisis in front of them. Boom! Incomparably terrifying mana waves erupted on the stairs that were not too wide. Faced with so many high-level dark magic masters, Jidong resolutely chose to face them head-on, because he was very clear that if he did not suppress the dark magic masters in front of him, it would be even more difficult for him to deal with them later. Hence, he relied on the support of Yao, Qianshu, and Chen Xishuan, as well as the support of the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon, which is of the same attribute as him, to unleash the fierce fire god slash that was filled with killing intent. This slash looked like a sword that was condensed by Jidong's hands and then slashed out horizontally. It couldn't be any simpler, but in fact, the control contained in this slash was something that not many Supremes could achieve. In a short period of time, he had fused so many streams of external mana with his own, poured them into the sword of the fire god, and used his tyrannical spiritual power to suppress the will of the god of massacre Shupness in the sword of the fire god. How could it be easy? The 6 red-robe high priests at the front were instantly turned into ashes by the sword of the fire god, leaving only their 8-crowned dark crystal crowns behind. However, it was fortunate that the 6 red-robe high priests at the front had blocked them, so the red-robe high priests at the back could release the boundary of the 5 elements. At the same time, 2 of the 6 red-robed high priests released scrolls, one of which was a super ultimate skill, Diamond Defense Scroll. Chapter 599. That violent boom was the sound of the fire god's slash, striking the diamond defense. The ultimate skill of the elementary earth element, which was known for its defense, could not stop the fire god slash for even a moment. In the next moment, the 6 red-robed high priests were killed. However, the diamond defense was an ultimate skill after all. The value of such a scroll could not be measured with money. In the end, it still weakened the power of the fire god slash. When the fire god's slash finally struck the 5 elements boundary, its power had been weakened by more than a third. Although the 6 red-robed high priests had been reduced to ashes, their magical powers and their magical weapons had played a role in blocking the fire god slash to a certain extent. Another violent boom rang out. The fire god's slash blasted against the 5 elements boundary formed by the 8-crowned great magicians. What would the scene be like? Before the 2 sides collided, no one could tell. Even Jidong did not know how far he could go. However, when the 2 sides collided, Jidong finally understood the profound meaning of the fire god slash. The terrifying heat turned into an unstoppable burning power. The simplest, most direct, and purest burning power of the fire attribute actually ignited the opponent's 5 elements boundary in an instant. The 5 elements boundary can also burn. In front of the fire god sword, the answer was yes. In order to activate the power of the fire god sword, the first source was the fire of chaos. Only the fire of chaos and the ultimate fire of yin and yang could drive this divine sword. Moreover, even Jidong himself had forgotten something. When he first fused the fire god sword into his body, it was still incomplete. Even though he had sealed the consciousness of the god of massacre Shupness within it, it could only barely support the power of the fire god sword. However, as time passed, Jidong's cultivation and understanding of the chaos continued to grow. His soul energy and body had even reached the saint tier. After fusing the fusion divine art into his body, it could be said that the fire god sword had always been nourished by Jidong's soul, flesh, demonic energy, and chaos. Back then, when Jidong had obtained the ancestral dragon's blood essence from the earth dragon ancestor, if not for the fact that the fire god sword had absorbed part of the demonic energy, then even if Jidong hadn't been able to break through to the 9th crown, his demonic energy would have increased greatly, and he wouldn't have broken through to the 9th crown later than Jidong. The fire god sword had absorbed a large amount of demonic energy, nourished itself, and gradually fused with Jidong's blood essence. The fire god sword was a true top-notch divine artifact. Even in the divine realm, it was a powerful divine artifact. In the process of being nourished by Jidong, it could be said that it was continuously recognizing its master. If the power provided by Jidong wasn't enough, then when the fire god sword completely sealed the killing god Shupness and turned it into a sword spirit, the fire god sword might even break free from Jidong's body. With the consciousness of a level 2 god as its sword spirit, the power of the fire god sword could even be ranked in the top 10 divine artifacts in the divine realm. And Jidong didn't disappoint the fire god sword. His cultivation continued to rise, his body was at the saint level, and his soul power was at the middle of the saint level. He was already able to satisfy the most basic requirements to control the fire god sword. Thus, the special characteristics of the fire god's sword began to show when he attacked. Other divine artifacts all had their own special abilities, so how could the fire god's sword not have one? It was just that Ji-dong hadn't fully comprehended it yet. The boundary of the 5 elements burned under the fire god's sword. Both sides were shocked. Then, the 10 red-robed high priests who formed the boundary of the 5 elements felt an unparalleled impact accompanied by a blazing heat. They could no longer maintain the integrity of the boundary of the 5 elements. As the second explosion sounded, the 10 figures were sent flying at the same time. They spurted out blood at the same time, which turned into red flames in the air. It was a spectacular sight. Although the 10 red-robed high priests didn't turn into ashes like the previous 6, they completely lost consciousness when they were sent flying. Their flying bodies even blocked the other Dark Devil Masters who were rushing up from behind. The terrifying heat caused the confidence of these Dark Devil Masters to instantly crumble. The 6 purple-robed high priests caught the 10 red-robed high priests who were blasted away, and their expressions changed drastically. The might of a single sword was so great that it was completely beyond their imagination. In their opinion, even if it was darkness Tianji, he would not be able to do anything to it. The fire god Slash had killed 6 red-robe high priests and seriously injured 10 others. In the blink of an eye, 16 8-crown divine masters had been seriously injured. This had never happened in their memory. Looking at the golden light patterns around the black and white yin-yang crown on top of Ji-dong's head, they already knew who Ji-dong was. The red light on the fire god's sword dimmed a little. Even though Ji-dong had a calm personality, he couldn't help but reveal an intense surprise on his face. It turned out to be the power of a high-level sure-kill skill, and it also had some characteristics of the fire god's sword. Although Ji-dong couldn't tell what these characteristics were, he was sure that they existed, and they had never appeared when he used the fire god's sword before. Could it be that the fire god's sword had evolved? Or could it be that the power of the fire god's sword could finally be unleashed? But no matter what, this was a great surprise for Ji-dong. The reason why he chose to use the fire god's sword was because he was better at close combat. Long-range attacks were relatively weaker. If it was close combat, Ji-dong could almost use the deity Slash to unleash the power of a sure-kill skill. Long-range attacks obviously couldn't do this. For many years, Ji-dong had insisted on using close-range attacks. The most direct reason was that he relied on the deity Slash to attack his opponents. Not only was it powerful, but it also saved a lot of mana, which allowed him to fight for a longer time. There was no doubt that long-range attacks would consume a lot more mana than the deity Slash if it was also a sure-kill skill. But the current situation forced Ji-dong to use long-range attacks to stop the enemies, because his goal was not only to deal with these enemies, but also to stop them from rushing up. Once the darkness returned, their only way out was to escape immediately. Moreover, there were far more enemies here than they expected. If they were caught by these purple and red-robed high priests, the situation would become very dangerous. Hence, when Ji-dong used the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon to block the stairway, he had already made up his mind to stop the enemies in front of him before his companions found the 2 water element artifacts. Hence, he summoned his fire god sword immediately and activated the fire god Slash. He was determined to give them a show of strength. It was just that he had originally hoped to use the fire god's Slash to stop these enemies from advancing and force them back. Who would have thought that the fire god Slash would kill 6 red-robe high priests and severely injure 10 others? Such power had completely exceeded Ji-dong's expectations. What surprised him the most was that the mana consumption of the fire god Slash was reduced by a third, and the power of the fire god Slash directly jumped from a mid-grade sure-kill skill to a high-grade sure-kill skill. Moreover, the Grim Reaper Sharpness was struggling a lot less. This way, when he used the fire god sword, he could save some of the spiritual power that he had to suppress sharpness. In other words, he could use the fire god sword for a longer period of time. This way, there was no doubt that Ji-dong's overall strength would skyrocket, and his long-range attacks and instantaneous explosive power would rise to another level. This powerful divine weapon was finally starting to show its extraordinary power. The 6-meter-long fire god's sword pointed forward, and the sharp, murderous aura became incomparably tyrannical after the fire god's slash. Ji Dong stood on the back of the sacred evolution fiery dragon, as if he could hold the pass against 10,000 enemies by himself. Behind the mask of the divine fire's Saint King armor, divine lightning shot out from his eyes. If it wasn't for the yin-yang crown on his head, which clearly showed that he was a level 88 magical power, these dark magicians would have probably regarded him as a saint-level expert on par with the dark divination. In the dark five elements continent, any one of the red-robed high priests was a figure who could shake the world with a stomp of their feet. Which one of them wasn't an expert with great authority, and viewed commoners as nothing more than weeds? However, there were more than 30 red-robed high priests here who still had sufficient fighting strength, but the confidence, arrogance, and dominance in their eyes had all disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by fear, a fear that came from the bottom of their hearts. No matter how powerful a person was, they would subconsciously feel this way when facing an opponent they couldn't defeat. In their eyes, Ji Dong was already a completely abnormal existence, and none of the red-robed high priests dared to step forward. They almost subconsciously parted to the sides, revealing the 6 most powerful purple-robed high priests. At the same time, these red-robed high priests did not need to be instructed to form 2 5-elements boundaries, and at the same time, they took out all their trump cards. Not only were they wearing magical weapons and armors, most of the red-robed high priests were also holding scrolls in their hands. Ji Dong's sword had frightened them from the bottom of their hearts. Chen Xishuan, who was behind Ji Dong, was also shocked. There was no doubt that she was the one who understood Ji Dong's strength the best. When the fire god's slash produced such a tyrannical effect, she was the first to understand it. She could see it even more clearly than Ji Dong. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and Chen Xishuan thought to herself, after so many years of nurturing, is it finally starting to bear fruit? Fire God Sword, how many more surprises can you bring me? When Ji Dong breaks through to the 9 crowns, I will definitely let you show your true strength. Ji Dong naturally did not know what Chen Xishuan was thinking. He only knew that his goal had been achieved. With 1 slash, 6 people were killed, 10 were seriously injured, and the dark magicians in front of him did not move forward. His basic goal had been achieved. The Tai Chi demon domain lit up under his feet, and the sacred evolution fire dragon's feet, frantically condensing fire elements to replenish himself. As long as the other party did not try to break through his defense, he would not take the initiative to attack. As long as he could get the 2 water divine weapons, then their trip today would be considered perfect. Ji Dong was not arrogant enough to think that he could kill all these magicians in front of him with his own strength. After all, the fire god slash was not a deity killing strike. It was completely an external release of mana. Furthermore, he had to catch the fire god sword. Even with the support of 2 companions, and under the situation where he had saved 1/3 of his mana, Ji Dong's own mana was still sharply reduced by more than 1/3. In other words, he could only use that kind of attack twice at most. This was the pain of lacking mana. In any case, he was still an 8-crown magician who had not broken through to the 9 crowns. No matter how much amplification, no matter how great the advantage of dual attributes, it could not change this fact. Not to mention these magicians in front of him, there were tens of thousands of dark magicians outside. Ji Dong had absolute reason to believe that the Dark Demon Army must have their own group fusion magic skills. Let alone him, even Dark Destiny would not be willing to face the group fusion magic skills of tens of thousands of 4-crown magicians. The 6 purple-robed high priests slowly stepped forward. The shock in their eyes did not diminish at all. They had never thought that an 8-crown magician could reach such a level. They could naturally see that the weapon in Ji Dong's hand was a divine weapon. However, could a divine weapon produce such a huge power? It should be known that the magic weapons and equipment of the red-robe high priests in the Dark Temple were the best. Although not all of them were sub-divine weapons, they were definitely of high quality. Under such circumstances, they could not even block that attack. One could imagine the heaviness in their hearts at this time. Previously, it was a situation of gathering and annihilating, but in the blink of an eye, it became a situation of one man holding the fort. This change could clearly tell them many things. They did not know how the man in front of them came to be, but they were completely sure that he was the holy king of light heavenly stems that dark destiny wanted to get rid of. Chapter 600. Rich demonic power rose from the bodies of the six supreme being powerhouses, and all the pressure was concentrated on Ji-dong. Among the six purple-robe high priests, there were 4 men and 2 women. They had Fire, Yang Wood, Yang Earth, and Yang Earth attributes respectively. Obviously, when they chose the people who were left behind, they had deliberately left behind the Yin and Yang attributes. If anything happened, the Yin and Yang attributes would fuse and multiply their strength. At this moment, the 6 supreme being powerhouses had fully increased their demonic power, causing the strength of the demonic power in the air to reach an unprecedented level. Moreover, there were so many red-robed high priests. If the inner castle in front of them had not been built with unknown hard materials, it would have collapsed under such a huge wave of demonic power. The air had become a little sticky. If ordinary people were here, they would not even have the ability to move. Not just ordinary people, even devil masters with relatively strong cultivation would not be spared. Ji-dong's expression also became solemn. He did not launch another attack. Although the fire god slash was powerful, it undoubtedly consumed a lot of energy. He was not confident that he could use the fire god slash to injure the 6 purple-robed high priests in front of him. After all, they were 6 supreme being powerhouses. Moreover, among the 6 supreme being powerhouses, he could tell from their yin-yang crowns that none of them had just entered the 9 crowns cultivation. They were all experienced 9 crowns cultivators. The one with the lowest demonic power was also at level 93, while the 2 strongest were at level 96. They formed a team of 2, and the yin and yang attribute demonic power fused faintly, giving him the feeling that there were 6 of them in one body. Ji-dong understood that not only did the number of supreme being powerhouses in the Darkness Temple exceed the total number of the 5 elements continent, but these supreme being powerhouses had always cultivated together and cooperated for many years. This tacit understanding was not something that the supreme being powerhouses in the 5 elements continent could possess. At this moment, it could be seen from the trajectory of the 6 supreme being powerhouses that they did not move at all. Once they moved, they would definitely go all out. Furthermore, they did not seem to be in a hurry to rush up. Of course, this was not because they were not worried that the top floor would be destroyed without the protection of the formation, but because if they could kill Ji-dong, then even if some of the most precious things on the top floor were destroyed, or even the 2 water-type artifacts were taken away, they would definitely make a profit. Furthermore, although the current situation seemed to be very advantageous to Ji-dong and the others, in reality, there was also a disadvantage. That was, Ji-dong could not leave this position. He could not leave before his companions obtained the 2 water-type artifacts. Otherwise, everything would be in vain. Under such circumstances, Ji-dong had to face the attacks of the 6 supreme being powerhouses head-on and could not retreat. It could be said that this was also the best opportunity for them to kill Ji-dong. The 6 purple robe high priests could be said to be the most loyal direct subordinates of Dark Tianji. After confirming Ji-dong's identity, they immediately made a decision. Between protecting the top floor and killing the Light Saint King in front of them, the latter was obviously more important. As long as they could kill Ji-dong, they would only be rewarded and not punished even if Dark Tianji discovered that the inner castle had been damaged to a certain extent when he returned. Compared to the red-robed high priests, the purple-robed high priests were much more at ease when facing Ji-dong. First of all, they also possessed ultimate demonic energy, and Ji-dong's ultimate demonic energy did not have any attribute suppression on them. Moreover, although the overall cultivation of the 6 supreme being powerhouses could not compare to the fusion of Ji-dong and Qin Si Xuan, the suppression effect was much weaker. After the confrontation began, the 6 purple robe high priests were in no hurry to attack. They each held their own demonic energy weapons in their hands, and all of them were of the demonic energy level. The demonic energy on their bodies expanded without reservation, exerting more and more pressure on Jidong. Jidong, Yao Qianshu, who was standing behind Jidong, could not help but call out to him. He was reminding Jidong that the three of them, who had not reached the level of 9 crowns, could take on 6 Supreme Being powerhouses head-on. Naturally, Jidong was aware of what Yao Qianshu could determine. However, he could not retreat. He had already sensed that Tianji and the others had found a location of the water divine weapons. However, there were a few powerful magical beasts there that had to be eliminated first before they could obtain the 2 divine weapons. How could the magical beasts that could maintain their demonic energy under the full power of the chaos attribute be weak? They still needed time, and this time had to be fought for by himself. He could not retreat. Once he retreated to the 4th floor through the stairs, the terrain would be much wider, and there would be more enemies that could attack at the same time. Moreover, he could not guarantee that he would not let anyone rush up. Taking a deep breath, Jidong's eyes flickered with determination. He tightened his grip on the fire god's sword and became one with his mind. He focused all of his attention on this god artifact that was even more powerful than before. At this time, the 6 high priests finally made their move. Their demonic energy had been raised to the peak. Behind each of them, the totems of their respective elements shone faintly. Dual fire, dual wood, dual earth. The 6 high priests suddenly changed their positions. The 2 supremes of dual earth stood at the front, then dual fire, and finally dual wood. The 4 devil masters behind them raised their arms at the same time. Dual wood strengthened dual fire strengthened dual earth. Using wood to nourish fire, and fire to nourish earth, they completed the mutual support. At this moment, Jidong's expression really changed. Although these Dark Devil Masters did not know the 5-element cycle formation that he had created, it did not stop them from exerting the mutual support of magic power. Although it could not last long without a cycle, once such a combination was completed, the attacks of the 2 Earth Supreme Masters standing at the front, who had the highest cultivation, were instantly raised to the saint level. In order to kill Jidong, the 6 high priests had previously reached a consensus that they must destroy Jidong here. In order to kill Jidong, the 6 high priests had already reached a consensus that they must destroy Jidong here. They could also see that Jidong must have an extremely high level of attainment in fire magic power. Previously, he had joined forces with the holy disciples of light and light to use the profound meaning of chaos of all attributes. If the 6 of them attacked separately, then the 2 dual Fire Supreme Masters would not be too much of a threat to Jidong. It would not be as good as what was happening now. The earth element was the first to subdue water and the second to subdue fire. Furthermore, with the powerful magic power of the 6 Supreme Masters, they were determined to succeed in this attack. The vast space around them had been locked by the magic power of the 2 Supreme Masters who had instantly raised to the saint level. Now, even if Jidong and the others wanted to retreat, they could not. Otherwise, their momentum would be weakened and they would instantly collapse under the opponent's attack. Indeed, Jidong's comprehensive strength was enough to contend with a saint-level expert. Even the Dragon Emperor would find it difficult to win against him. However, if he relied on his comprehensive strength, speed, cultivation of the soul, and other aspects, as well as the powerful deity killing strike, he might be able to contend with a saint-level expert. However, in such a head-on collision, it was impossible for him to win with his magic power, even if he had the sword of the fire god. Moreover, he was facing 2 saint-level experts who had yin and yang integration. The situation had been reversed once again, and it seemed that Jidong was facing a dead end. However, under such circumstances, Jidong did something unbelievable. He took the initiative to put away his sword of the fire god. The red light faded and disappeared into his body. His action stunned the 6 purple-robed high priests. They could not understand why Jidong would give up the powerful divine weapon in his hand. They were not afraid that Jidong would run away. Although the 2 Earth Attribute Supreme Masters had not completed their upgrade, the pressure of the saint-level experts had made it impossible for Jidong and the others to escape. Just as they were shocked, everyone saw that Jidong was doing something extremely strange. His hands were like a torrential storm, and each of his palms was silent, without the slightest fluctuation of mana, let alone an attack. No one could feel what he was doing. Looking at him, it was as if he was waving his palms for no reason. Has this kid gone mad? Almost all the red-robe high priests had the same thought. The 6 purple-robe high priests did not think that Jidong had gone mad, but they could not understand why Jidong was doing this. He gave up the power of the divine weapon and waved his palms in the air. Even if he had some powerful special skill, could the power of this skill surpass his previous divine weapon when facing a saint-level expert? This time, even Chen Sichuan could not understand what Jidong was doing, let alone the enemies. The moment Jidong put away the fire god sword, he had already isolated his soul from her and Yao Qinshu's magic power. In almost a few breaths, Jidong's palms had alternated dozens of times. At first, everything was normal, but as the number of palms he waved increased, his face gradually turned pale. Chen Sichuan and Yao Qinshu could clearly feel that the magic power in Jidong's body was draining at an alarming rate. Although this speed was not as fast as the fire god sword, it was continuous and stable. In almost a few blinks of an eye, the consumption of magic power had exceeded the consumption of the fire god slash. Jidong, what are you doing? Yao Qinshu and Chen Sichuan wanted to ask, but they could not do so at this time. They could not distract Jidong. No matter what Jidong was doing, their only choice was to believe in him and believe that everything he was doing was not useless. Activating their ultimate magic power to support Jidong was the only thing they could do now. Chen Sichuan had already thought it through. If Jidong could not withstand the saint-level attack later, she, who was wearing the armor of eternity, would immediately break the space sealed by the saint-level magic power with her divine sense and stand in front of Jidong. After having this thought, she calmed down and said silently in her heart, Jidong, no matter what you do, I will support you unconditionally. Even if you refuse to acknowledge me, I will die with you. Seeing that Jidong's expression was getting uglier and uglier, the 2 earth-element purple-robed high priests at the front also felt that something was wrong. Their mana had completely condensed, and the pure saint-level mana made them not care about what Jidong was doing. In their opinion, in the face of this attack, Jidong would only end up being destroyed. Blinding golden light and gray light shone at the same time. Terrifying saint-tier mana rippled in the air. The 2 purple-robed high priests who had been enhanced to the saint tier raised their hands at the same time. They had also abandoned their mana weapons. Attacks, in the form of energy, could only be controlled with their hands. Moreover, the mana they were using now was beyond the range of their control, so they had to be extremely careful. The golden and gray mana interweaved in the air, and an incomparably heavy aura repelled all the mana of the other attributes in the entire space. In the midst of this terrifying mana fluctuation, the red-robe high priests all retreated to the 2nd floor of the inner castle, afraid of being affected by this terrifying mana. However, no one's eyes left the 2 earth-element purple-robed high priests. Although they had the cultivation of 8 crowns, this kind of saint-level attack was not something they could see often. Paying more attention to it would be of great benefit to their future cultivation. In their eyes, Jidong and the other 2 were already 3 corpses. They did not believe that with only the cultivation of 8 crowns, Jidong and the other 2 could withstand the joint attack of 2 saint-level high priests. Especially when these 2 saint-level high priests had the yin and yang fusion attribute. When a demon master's attack reached a certain level, it could transform into the appearance of a totem, and its power would multiply. However, when a demon master's attack was raised to the saint level, the totem would be weakened instead. This was because the cultivation of a saint-level high priest was completely above that of a divine totem beast. Therefore, only the purest form of energy would appear. The golden light that represented the ultimate earth gradually became transparent, like a diamond, while the gray light that represented the ultimate earth became darker. The 2 rays of light almost fused together under the full power of the 2 purple-robed high priests. At this moment, the 2 purple-robed high priests were not at ease either. Their foreheads were already covered in sweat, and their bodies were even trembling because they had used too much of their soul power to control the attack. Anyone could see that after this attack, the 4 purple-robe high priests who were responsible for the amplification might be fine, but the 2 who launched the attack would definitely be exhausted and collapse. But so what? As long as they could kill Ji Dong, the holy king of light and brightness, it would be worth it even if they were severely injured, let alone collapse. In the next moment, the transparent and black light beam that had fused with each other was already heading straight for Ji Dong. The thick light beam was the size of a water tank, and the mana contained within it was unimaginably vast. Chapter 601. After the amplification of the other 4 purple-robed high priests, the 2 earth purple-robed high priests standing at the front finally launched a fatal attack against Hyoheim. The ultimate dual earth fusion technique was a direct bombardment of the purest saint-level magic. The power of this attack had been completely raised to the level of a top-notch ultimate technique. Even dark divination had to be serious when facing such a top-notch ultimate technique. After all, it was released by the condensation of 6 supremes, relying on the mutual generation of the 5 elements and the complementary yin and yang. That was a top-notch ultimate technique. If Ji Dong could get the help of all his heavenly stem saint companions, he could also use a top-notch ultimate technique. But that would take time, and at this time, he did not have the support of all his companions behind him. Dual wood raising dual fire was good, but they were all 8 crowns. Although Ji Dong had dual fire, his overall magic power was still at level 88. Although he had the advantage in mutual generation, he could not compare to the total magic power of 2 magicians. Under such circumstances, it seemed that he would die without a doubt. Yao Qianshu had already subconsciously closed his eyes. Ji Dong was in front, but if Ji Dong died, he and Qin Sichuan would not be spared. He had no resentment towards Ji Dong. At this time, this guy was actually thinking that the most tragic thing in life was when the opponent's attack was within 3 meters of Ji Dong. Only then would she act, so that Ji Dong would not have the chance to stop it. She knew Ji Dong too well. As long as she gave him a little more time, he would definitely turn and use his body to block her. However, she would not give Ji Dong such a chance. She also did not take out the dragon egg form with extremely amazing defense. She was willing to die to save Ji Dong, but she would not let Si Dong take the risk. She even used her soul power to suppress Si Dong so that it would not appear. She knew Ji Dong too well. As long as she gave him a little more time, he would definitely turn and use his body to block her. However, she would not give Ji Dong such a chance. She also did not take out the dragon egg form with extremely amazing defense power. She was willing to die to save Ji Dong, but she would not let Si Dong take the risk. She even used her soul power to suppress Si Dong so that it would not appear. Let alone them. Even Mao Tai and Wu Yangye, who were telepathically connected with Ji Dong, had subconsciously closed their eyes. There was nothing they could do now. There was no way they could stop this scene from happening. They could only continuously pour all of their mana into Ji Dong in an attempt to make a final struggle. Black-gray mana spiraled, and the diamond-like ultimate saint-level earth element mana shone brilliantly under the illumination of the surrounding light. The huge light pillar seemed to be able to engulf Ji Dong and the other 2, including the sacred evolution fire dragon, in the next instant. This was the first time that the holy disciples of the Light Palace had encountered a saint-level fusion technique. Even when they faced the Earth Dragon Ancestor, the Earth Dragon Ancestor did not use a saint-level fusion technique to attack Ji Dong. His expression was completely different from his companions. Although Ji Dong's face was getting paler and paler, and his hands were still alternately striking out, his expression was abnormally determined. In the eyes of the enemy, this was completely reckless, but his companions could not see how his expression was right now. If Qin Sichuan and Yao Qianshu could see Ji Dong's current expression, then the thoughts in their hearts would definitely undergo an earth-shattering change, because they were all too familiar with Ji Dong. This expression of Ji Dong's was completely the expression of confidence. Thank you. These 2 words were uttered from Ji Dong's mouth. When he uttered these two words, that top-notch ultimate technique had already gushed out and was less than 10 meters away from him. Thank you. The purple robe high priest thought that there was something wrong with their ears. These two words had awakened Yao, Qianshu, and the sacred evolution fire dragon at the same time. Their eyes widened at once. Chun Sixuan, who was already prepared to take action, also abruptly stopped her actions. Instead, she unhesitatingly injected a small portion of the mana that she had previously split into full force into Jidong's body. With Jidong's Saint-level rest soul, it was not a problem for him to withstand so much mana, and his meridians would definitely not be damaged. This was because she could tell that the two words Jidong had said were directed at the other party, and not at her, and Yao Qianshu. Thank the enemy? What did this mean? A low, buzzing sound rang out without warning, and the entire inner castle trembled violently. The faces of the dark magic masters who were waiting to see Jidong be engulfed by that top-notch ultimate technique. Whether it was the purple robe high priest who had launched the attack or the red robe high priest who had been watching the battle, all turned pale at the same time. The reason was very simple. The top-notch ultimate technique that was entangled with the dazzling radiance of the black and gray light had actually changed its direction. Just when it was 5 meters away from Jidong's body, the light pillar that was as thick as a water tank changed its direction without any warning. From bombarding Hyoheim to blasting upwards, the terrifying mana wave did not change at all. However, this simple change in direction had already caused everything to change. Boom! An incomparably violent rumble rang out. Not only the inner castle, but all the buildings in the vicinity of the Darkness Shrine also shook violently, as if they had encountered a magnitude 7 earthquake. The mages who were rushing to the inner castle couldn't help but stagger as they tried to control their bodies. Jin and Lang Tianyi, who had been enduring the attacks of countless mages, felt the pressure lessen. They couldn't help but turn around subconsciously because the deafening rumble and the sudden earthquake all came from the inner castle behind them. What's going on? What happened? This was the first thought that came to everyone's mind. Immediately after, the dark demon army that was swarming overstopped completely. They raised their heads and looked at the sky above the supreme inner castle of the Darkness Shrine with their mouths agape. A glaring light pillar, along with countless shattered stones and a massive mana wave, shot into the sky. The dazzling brilliance even illuminated the entire vicinity of the Darkness Shrine in an instant. That's every dark magician's eyes were filled with disbelief. In their impression, the inner castle of the Darkness Temple was an impenetrable fortress. When they found out that an enemy had sealed the inner castle, they were in disbelief. However, at that moment, when they saw a thick pillar of light blast through the highest point of the inner castle and blast open a huge hole dozens of square meters wide at the top of the inner castle, they finally understood that the Darkness Temple, which was known to be eternal, was not indestructible. In terms of shock, no one could be more shocked than Jin and Lang Tianyi. This was because they were the ones who knew the situation in the Slaying Sound Castle from the outside, and they were the only ones who knew the situation in the inner castle the best. The pearl of thick earth that was floating in front of Lang Tianyi trembled violently, allowing him to clearly sense the massive amount of ultimate dual earth mana contained in the light pillar that shot into the sky. However, the more he felt this way, the more he could not believe what he was seeing. Without a doubt, the ones who destroyed the inner castle had to be the saints from the Light Radiance realm. However, the Light Earth Divine Disciple was here. How could he have used such an ultimate dual earth fusion demonic skill? Moreover, even if he joined forces with Meow Meow, coupled with the Pearl of Thick Earth and the Staff of the Earth Goddess, he did not have the ability to unleash such a terrifying ultimate skill. In other words, this was not done by the saints from the Light Radiance realm. However, if it was not them, who did it? Jin's thoughts were similar to Lang Tianyi's. However, as the daughter of the progenitor dragon, and with a saint-level physique, she could sense the attack even more clearly. She could clearly tell that this powerful attack required at least 2 beginner saint-level experts to join forces. Putting aside the fact that there were 2 saint-level experts in the inner castle, She could not understand why the two saint-level experts would attack the inner castle. Lang Tianyi and Ajin looked at each other and said, "Sister Ajin, what should we do?" Even though Ajin looked younger than him, Ajin had actually lived for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. It was not wrong for him to call her sister. In reality, among the heavenly stem saints, other than Jidong, Tianji, and Chun Sichuan, almost everyone else called Ajin that. Of course, Fury, who had already performed the infernal affairs, was also unwilling to call her that. Ajin said in a low voice, "We don't do anything and continue our mission." Jidong cut off our spiritual connection just now, but he did not tell us anything about the mission at that time. Therefore, we must continue to guard here and wait for his signal. She did not doubt Jidong's words at all. It was not because of the feeling she hid for Jidong in the depths of her heart, but also because Jidong had never disappointed her. Confidence was always built up bit by bit. Moreover, Ajin firmly believed that without the existence of the heavenly secrets, even if the dark heavenly stem saints gathered together, they would not be able to pose a real threat to Jidong. Ajin's words strengthened Lang Tianyi's confidence. He took a deep breath and stood firmly on the ground, as if he had taken root. He allowed the ground to shake from the violent explosion in the inner castle, but he did not move at all. Both he and Ajin knew that the violent explosion had shocked the Dark Demon Army beyond compare. However, when the explosion ended and the ground stopped shaking, what awaited them would be the crazy charge of the Dark Demon Army. The destruction of the inner castle would definitely cause the Dark Demon Army to go crazy. Ajin flipped her wrist, and the golden ring of extermination appeared in her hand. To her, killing was a common occurrence, and she did not feel any psychological pressure at all. The number of Dark Demon Masters that she had killed was 3 times that of Lang Tianyi's. It should not be forgotten that Lang Tianyi's magic rank was 1 level higher than Ajin's, and it was only his body that was weaker than hers. The difference in the number of kills was not just a difference in technique, but more importantly, a difference in mentality. Furthermore, every time she killed a Dark Demon Master, Ajin would never forget to obtain the Darkness Crystal Crown from him. This was related to whether the Heavenly Stem Saints could reach 9 crowns in a short period of time. Crazy, what was crazy? They would soon know. The rubble in the sky fell like rain into the inner castle's moat. After the ground stopped shaking, the Dark Demon Army paused for a moment. Then, crazy shouts accompanied by hysterical roars rang out. All of the Dark Demon Army seemed to have gone mad as they swarmed towards the inner castle. The Dark Demon Army that had rushed over earlier had only come from the ground, but now, all the Dark Demon Army above 6 crowns had released their mounts. In the air and on the ground, hundreds and thousands of Dark Demon Army soldiers were like a dark cloud charging towards them. Reality proved that Jidong had made the right choice in keeping Ajin and Lang Tianyi, who were the strongest. If it had been the other two, they would not have been able to resist this charge. Ajin said in a low voice, "You just have to guard the main gate. I will do my best to reduce the pressure on you." With so many people charging at the same time, it was not something that could be handled on the ground. There was such a large hole in the top of the inner castle. If the Dark Demon Army that had charged up from the sky were allowed to charge in, it would very likely affect Jidong's deployment. These Dark Demon Army were not strong overall. Even the 8 crowns red robe high priest was rare, but they had the advantage in numbers. Therefore, what Ajin had to do now was to do her best to prevent them from approaching. A brilliant golden light burst forth from Ajin's body, and an incomparably loud dragon's roar rang out. Her petite body shot up like a powerful bow. Golden light blossomed, and in the blink of an eye, Ajin had transformed into a 20-meter-long golden dragon. She twisted and swung her body in the air, and the first few magic masters with flying mounts that had charged over were swept away by her powerful saint-level physique. They turned into a rain of blood in the air. Lang Tianyi looked at Ajin and couldn't help but reveal some admiration in his eyes. Only when he had truly fought alongside Ajin could he understand how terrifying her strength was and how swift and fierce her killing methods were. Lang Tianyi knew very well that even though he had the Pearl of Thick Earth, if he were to face Ajin one-on-one, he wouldn't even have the slightest chance. This was not even considering Jin's saint-level physique. Jin's combat ability was too strong. If he were to fight against Jin, he would be invincible at the same level. Dazzling golden light exploded in the air like countless golden thorns. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 dark demon masters and their mounts had fallen under Jin's powerful body. It should be known that Ji Dong's explosive speed was so strong that it was inferior to Jin's. How could these dark demon masters contend against her? Don't use super ultimate killing techniques or large-scale attack demonic techniques. Just as Jin was facing the many dark demon masters below and preparing to use super ultimate killing techniques to slaughter these dark experts, Ji Dong's voice sounded in her mind. Chapter 602. Although Ji Dong did not share the power of the soul with Jin and Lang Tianyi, he was always paying attention to their situation. At the most critical moment, he passed on this message to Jin. Although Jin was puzzled and did not understand why Ji Dong wanted her to give up such a good opportunity, she did not go against Ji Dong's wishes. In her opinion, the hundreds of dark demon masters in front of her only needed one area of effect super killing skill to immediately cause great damage to the opponent. Wasn't this their true goal after entering the Five Elements continent? However, Jin quickly understood Ji Dong's deeper meaning and could not help but admire his timely warning. Facing Jin's violent attack in the air, hundreds of dark demon masters below stopped. Blinding golden light instantly condensed, and hundreds of golden light condensed into one. In an instant, a virtual image of a vermilion bird rose in the air. Different from the five-element continent, this vermilion bird had a black feather on its forehead. Although it was very small, it was exceptionally eye-catching on its golden-red body. These dark demon masters who had stopped in their tracks were undoubtedly of the third fire attribute. Hundreds of people attacked together, and their average cultivation was around 6 crowns. Their combined power would definitely not be lower than a basic super essential skill. If Jin had prepared an area of effect super killing skill to attack, then her body would definitely have been delayed in the air, and the final result would have been a head-on collision with the opponent. Once that happened, not only would her advantage of agility disappear in the air, but she would also become the target of everyone. A super killing skill was nothing, but the opponent had thousands of people. If they were to fully unleash it, she would not be able to deal with it alone. Multiple combination skills of the same attribute was the best method for a group of demon masters with great teamwork to deal with high-level demon masters. Of course, if it was in the Five Elements continent, then it would be the Five Elements cycle formation created by Ji Dong, which was much stronger than their multiple combination skills of the same attribute. That's right, the Darkness Temple was the core of all the darkness magicians in the Darkness Five Elements continent. Under the rule of the Darkness Divination, this was the most important place. If the magicians here didn't even know multiple combination skills, how could they enter the Darkness Temple? Why didn't I think of that? Although Ajin was vexed, she didn't slow down at all. She just sneered when she saw the dark vermilion bird formed by the hundreds of devil masters take shape. Her figure flashed, and she charged proudly towards the dark vermilion bird. This was not the time to be impulsive. Of course, she was not impulsive. What she brought to the enemy was just a false impression. The dark vermilion bird soared into the sky under the full release of hundreds of third fire fiends, locked onto Ajin's huge body, and rushed up. However, they did not know that Ajin was not a pure giant dragon. Previously, they had only seen a giant golden dragon suddenly soar into the sky, and thought that it was a magical beast companion that Ajin and Lang Tianyi had summoned. At this moment, Ajin made them understand that nothing was impossible in this world. It was easy to lock onto a giant body of more than 20 meters, but what if this giant body suddenly disappeared the moment before the attack arrived? Or what if it suddenly turned into a slender girl? The first result was to break away from the lock. The huge primary super ultimate skill, the dark vermilion bird, swept past Ajin. Of course, this breaking away from the lock was only because Jin's body changed temporarily. The huge dark vermilion bird had already circled in the air and rushed towards Jin again, chasing closely behind Jin. Jin's speed shocked the Dark Devil Masters. After she transformed into a human form, she fell from the sky like a golden light, and her speed was no slower than the dark vermilion bird. On the surface, it seemed that the dark vermilion bird was following closely behind Jin, but it couldn't hit Jin at all, because the speed that Jin displayed at this time was completed under her deliberate control and not her true speed. This is... The dark magicians who had just used the dark vermilion bird fusion skill were dumbfounded. They had been fighting head-on just a moment ago. But how did the golden dragon suddenly turn into a golden-armored woman? Furthermore, it had changed its direction and turned into a chase. Furthermore, it seemed as if perhaps she was coming towards them. The dark magicians with fast reflexes immediately turned around and ran. Although they didn't know what was going to happen next. Even if a super ultimate skill hit Jin, they wouldn't be able to withstand the aftershock if they were too close to them. Those with slow reflexes were still standing there stupidly. Aftermath? There wouldn't be any aftermath. How big was Jin's body? How big was the dark vermilion bird's body? When the dark vermilion bird released this primary super ultimate skill, its body condensed from magic power was about 20 meters long, and its wingspan reached a terrifying 40 meters. It was even larger than Jin's dragon-shaped body. Super ultimate skills were inherently destructive. A cold smile spread across Jin's face. Jidong said not to let me use my super ultimate skill, but he didn't say that I couldn't use my own super ultimate skill to hit myself. Jin's body was about to hit the ground. Just as she was about 3 meters away from the ground, her body suddenly twisted strangely. Her right leg struck the ground like a whip, and her entire body bounced back diagonally. Golden light formed a perfect hook in the air as she flew up diagonally. The dark vermilion bird followed closely behind Jin. Just as the Dark Devil Masters thought it was about to hit Jin disappeared. However, the dark vermilion bird's charge wasn't that easy to stop. Although it had locked onto Jin's body and was also a primary super ultimate skill, it was still a group fusion technique. After it was released, it could only lock onto the opponent and attack. No one could control it. Which of the Dark Devil Masters who released, it had such strong soul power. Moreover, its body was so huge, and it followed Jin so closely. The moment Jin bounced back, it had already hit the ground. The power of the primary super ultimate skill bloomed among the Dark Devil Masters who released it. Boom! The violent explosion of the Sure Kill skill caused the charging dark mages to pause. Although the dark vermilion bird was a single target attack skill, when it fiercely bombarded the ground, the power it produced was still very strong. Within a radius of 100 meters, all the Dark Devil Masters were instantly vaporized. In an instant, at least 100 Dark Devil Masters went straight to hell. Within a radius of 300 meters, although the other Dark Devil Masters weren't directly killed, most of them were thrown into the air by the terrifying shockwave. As for what they would look like when they fell and what effect the shockwave would have on them, it was hard to calculate. On the other side, the position of the inner castle gate wasn't very steep, but the diamond defense that blocked the gate brazenly blocked the charge of a large number of Dark Devil Masters. Magic skills bombarded the diamond defense one after another, triggering circles of halo ripples, but it didn't shake this super ultimate skill at all. Not everyone could release a terrifying attack like Jidong's Fire God Slash. Moreover, the diamond defense that Lang Tianyi released was not a primary super ultimate skill, but an intermediate super ultimate skill. With the Pearl of Thick Earth, a powerful and unique artifact, when he used any skill, the consumption of magic power would be greatly reduced, and the effect of the skill would be increased. To break through this intermediate super ultimate skill was not something that the Dark Devil Masters outside, who didn't even have a 9-crown Supreme Expert, could do in a short period of time. Compared to Jin, Lang Tianyi was much more relaxed. Behind him was the Earth Condensation Formation. In front of him was the Diamond Defense to block the enemy, and powerful Earth Spikes were constantly released through the Diamond Defense. The formation of the Dark Devil Masters was so dense, and every time the Earth Spikes appeared, there would be a lot of gains. In comparison, it was much faster than killing the Dark Devil Masters earlier. The battle outside was getting more and more intense, and the situation in the inner castle had already changed greatly. When the two saint-level people's attacks were reflected into the air, all the Dark Devil Masters were dumbfounded. Who would have thought that the situation would suddenly change like this? The sudden turn of events caught them unprepared. The Red Robe High Priests didn't have it too bad. Given their authority, they usually couldn't go beyond the 5th floor of the inner castle. However, the faces of the 6 Purple Robe High Priests turned extremely ugly because they could clearly calculate with a top-notch sure-kill skill hit. It was the periphery of the Forbidden Room. Many secrets and precious things of Dark Tianji were stored in the Forbidden Room, although they had never entered it. The things that were collected by Dark Tianji must be extraordinary. It was said that there were precious anti-aging drugs in there, which made Dark Tianji look younger than the Yonghao, the ultimate weapon of the Dark Heavenly Stem Holy King, even though he was already more than 50 years old. Dark Tianji's age itself was a mystery, and so was the succession of Dark Tianji. Even the people in the Dark Temple could not know. Obviously, there were many secrets about Dark Tianji in the Forbidden Room. Besides, the Forbidden Room was protected by an extremely powerful formation, and it was also the toughest place in the entire Dark Temple. That was why the Purple Robe High Priest could attack Ji Dong freely. They believed that the Forbidden Room could not be easily broken through by the Saints of the Light Heavenly Stem. Moreover, there were several powerful top magical beasts guarding outside the Forbidden Room. However, the location where the 6 purple-robed high priests had attacked was the wall at the entrance of the Forbidden Room, as well as where the magical beasts were. No matter how tough the building materials of the inner castle were, how could it withstand the attack of a top-notch technique without the protection of a formation? Ji Dong spat out a mouthful of blood as the deafening rumble rang out. He swayed violently on the dragon's back. Fortunately, Chun Sichuan and Yao Qianshu supported him from behind, preventing him from collapsing. A stern look flashed across Ji Dong's eyes. He took a deep breath and activated the chaotic force in his body, forcefully suppressing his injuries. It seemed like the refraction just now was very simple, but only he knew how much pressure he had endured. Changing the direction of a top-notch technique was not that simple. However, he knew very well that he could not collapse at a time like this, because he was the backbone of the Radiant Divine Sect and the mastermind of this trip. He did not know if the Dark Heavenly Secrets could sense the inner castle being bombarded like this, but he could not take the risk. Only by leaving as soon as possible would he have a chance to recover. Send me. Ji Dong drank a mouthful of thousand-year source of life. At the same time, the core of life around his neck rippled with a rich green luster. It was obvious that his internal injuries were not light. Before Yao Qianshu could understand what Ji Dong meant, Chen Sichuan had already gritted her teeth and pushed Ji Dong's back, sending him flying. Even though he was seriously injured, Ji Dong's eyes still shone with a cold light. The flying serpent flash had already been unleashed in midair. Almost in a flash, he had already arrived in front of the 2 earth-element purple-robed high priests. The 2 purple-robed high priests were saint-tier powerhouses after all. A top-notch sure-kill skill had completely drained the mana in their bodies, causing them to collapse. The other 4 purple-robed high priests behind them were in a better state, but they could only exert 20 to 30% of their strength at this time. Who would have thought that Ji Dong could still launch another attack after being bombarded by a top-notch sure-kill skill? At this moment, they were at their weakest, and Ji Dong was taking advantage of this fleeting opportunity. Once the 4 purple-robe high priests who had expended less energy had a breather or were protected by the red-robe high priests, this opportunity would disappear. At this moment, the top-notch ultimate skill changed direction, and the entire Divine Temple of Darkness was shaking violently. Everyone was still in a state of shock. Only he, the initiator of all this, had the most correct judgment, and Chen Sichuan, who was his confidant who could cooperate with him in time, had created this excellent opportunity in front of him. Be careful, defend. A purple-robed high priest shouted, and his body instantly leaped back. At the same time, he had already unfolded a scroll, and a bright light forcibly blocked in front of him, protecting him and the other purple-robed high priest. Another diamond defense. A trace of regret flashed in Ji Dong's eyes. He could only kill two. Chapter 603. Ji Dong didn't expect the purple-robed high priest to be so vigilant in this situation. The four purple-robed high priests behind him had already been blocked by the diamond defense, and with his current mana, it was impossible to break through the defense of a basic ultimate skill. While sighing, Ji Dong's hands landed on the heads of the two earth-element purple-robed high priests. Without any suspense, the two earth-element purple-robed high priests who had lost all their mana were instantly blown to smithereens. The explosive power of the deity vanquishing strike even turned their blood into offensive power, which scattered in all directions and prevented the red-robed high priests who had just reacted from rushing forward. The red-robed high priests had already been frightened by Ji Dong to the point that they were a little deranged. They scattered in panic and dodged the flesh that couldn't cause them any harm. Ji Dong didn't stop at all. He bent his body and grabbed the two 9-crowned dark crystal crowns with both hands. He leaped up and landed on the back of the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon. At the same time, Mao Tai and Wu Yangye's breaths were also released at this moment, completely sealing off the red-robe high priest's path of pursuit. In fact, this was already unnecessary, as no red-robed high priest dared to chase after them in such a short period of time. The surviving purple-robed high priest felt a chill down his spine and was desperately trying to recover the mana in his body. The six of them had joined forces to unleash a top-notch ultimate skill, yet two of them had been killed. They didn't have enough mana now, so wouldn't charging forward be courting death? The rage of the Dark Tianji was much better than dying immediately. Ji Dong relied on his own power to resist the strongest power of the Darkness Shrine. Got it. The voice that Ji Dong wanted to hear the most finally sounded in his soul. It was the voice of the Tianji. Clearly, they had obtained their target, the dual water-type divine weapons of light. Even though his insides felt like they were on fire, Ji Dong could not help but laugh out loud. His wild laughter echoed through the large hole in the castle. To the Dark Demon Masters, it was filled with mockery. The Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon's body flashed, already rising into the air in the direction of the hole, charging out brazenly. Just as they were about to rush out of the hole, the five figures landed on the back of the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon. The black and white dragon instantly soared into the air and stood above the Divine Temple of Darkness. Tianji's face was filled with joy, while Du Ming and Lan Bauer could not hide their excitement. Just now, they had rushed to the highest floor of the castle. Under the guidance of Tianji, they had quickly found their target, but at the same time, they had encountered trouble. Miao Miao had told Tianji immediately that even with her staff of the Goddess of Earth, it would take her at least an hour to open the wall of the Forbidden Room, or even longer. This was under the condition that the formation of the Forbidden Room had lost its effect. Moreover, they could not focus on opening the Forbidden Room at that time, because there were 3 Class 10 magical beasts in front of them. These 3 magical beasts were not large, but it did not affect their strength at all. Among the 5 people who had reached the 7th floor of the inner castle, Tianji could only rely on his high-ranked Saint-tier soul force to assist the others. Among the 4 of them, Miao Miao, Du Exen Du Ming, and Lan Bauer, only Miao Miao was slightly stronger. Although Du Exen had also obtained a god artifact, her cultivation was still relatively weak, so the power she could unleash was limited. With their cultivation, they could not deal with 3 Class 10 magical beasts in a short period of time, even with Tianji's help. Coupled with the sturdiness of the walls of the Forbidden Room, the 5 people's hearts sank at that moment. However, no matter what, Tianji had told Ji Dong about the situation here as soon as possible. Tianji had put his position in the right place. In his heart, he would always be Ji Dong's servant and Ji Dong's subordinate. In the past, Tianji had always been the brains of the Heavenly Stem Saints, but the brains now belonged to the Saint Ruler, Ji Dong. Tianji would only give his opinion and would never influence Ji Dong's decision. However, when Tianji had told the situation here to Ji Dong, Dong's response to Tianji was to not get within 10 meters of the Forbidden Room, and to force the 3-class 10 magical beasts into that area as much as possible. With the strength of Meow Meow and the others, it would not be easy to get rid of the 3-class 10 magical beasts, but it was not a problem to restrain them. Just as they were completely carrying out Dong's orders, a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives appeared. Without any warning, Tianji's expression suddenly changed. This was because he had felt a terrifying wave of earth element mana, and the second thing he felt was Meow Meow's earth element mana. At that moment, everyone was at a loss and did not know what to do. In the next moment, a huge pillar of light appeared in front of them. The sturdy inner castle was so fragile in the face of a top-notch ultimate technique. The 3-class 10 magical beasts instantly disappeared under the huge pillar of light, and a huge hole was blasted in the thick and sturdy walls of the Forbidden Room. Under such circumstances, how could they not obtain 2 water element divine weapons in a short period of time? As for what else they had taken, they did not know. Time was tight, and Tianji sensed that Dong was not in a good state, so he immediately told him that they had succeeded. When the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon soared into the sky, everyone did not dare to stay any longer. They were greedy for the things in the Forbidden Room, so they got on the back of the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon and soared into the sky. It could be said that although 5 of them had reached the top, the real person who had obtained the divine weapons was Dong, who had stopped the Dark Experts. This was the first battle that the Light Alliance and the Holy Disciples had fully cooperated with each other. It was also the first battle after they entered the 5 Elements continent. In actual combat, Dong had used his actions and abilities to prove himself to everyone. Without him, this battle would not have been like this. It could be said that Dong had done everything perfectly. 10 dark red balls of light were thrown out from Dong's hands, and they were thrown in 10 different directions. Without exception, they were all aimed at the places outside the inner castle where the Dark Demon Army was the most numerous. At the same time, he sent a signal to Ajin and Lang Tianyi to retreat. Lang Tianyi was below the inner castle. He had already broken through to the 9 crowns and could fly by himself, but he did not summon his dragon mount. That would be too big a target, and it would waste too much time. Relying on the defensive skills released by the Pearl of Thick Earth, he rose into the air and arrived on the back of the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon in the blink of an eye. As for Ajin, no one could stop her here. She turned into a golden stream of light and returned to the back of the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon. 5 elements, yin-yang boundary. Dong shouted. As he said this, he spat out another mouthful of blood. The holy disciples were already full of admiration for him, and they released all their magic without hesitation. However, it was not Dong who cooperated with them, but the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon. The Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon released the ultimate dual fire magic on behalf of Dong and formed the 5 elements yin-yang boundary with them. The moment the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon rose into the air, it became the target of everyone who knew how many long-range skills were aimed at it. The 5 elements yin-yang world appeared at the perfect time, and the powerful defensive boundary blocked a large number of attacks. Just as the Dark Demon Army below was about to release multiple skills of the same attribute, the 10 inconspicuous dark red balls of light that Dong had thrown out had already fallen to the ground. The moment they landed, their power was suddenly unleashed. Boom! There was a roar, and 9 golden flame dragons appeared without warning. Dozens of dark demon masters nearest to them were immediately engulfed and turned into ashes. Primary super killing skill, 9 turns of the flame dragon. This super killing skill was the most basic among the 3rd fire type super killing skills. Although it was an area of effect attack, its attack power was not very strong. The attack strength in a unit area was only equivalent to the level of a killing skill. However, this 9 turns of the flame dragon had a great advantage. That was, after using it, it lasted for a very long time. The 9 golden flame dragons formed by the 9 turns of the flame dragon could last for at least 3 minutes, and they would spread out in all directions, covering a large area. Back then, When Yin Xiaoyang passed this skill to Ji Dong, he had told him that this skill was most effective in a group battle, especially in a war. However, it could deal a lot of damage, so he had to be cautious when using it. Because Ji Dong had a skill like Deity Extermination Strike, the two kings' super killing skills were also more practical. He had never used the 9 turns of the Flame Dragon. After all, the 9 turns of the Flame Dragon consumed too much single attribute magic power, and its power was relatively average. It was far less practical than the Sun and Moon world. This was the first time that Ji Dong used this super killing skill on the battlefield. However, it was not 1, but 10. The 10 dark red balls of light that were thrown out were 10 small wine bottles. Each bottle was made of jade of the earth. The magic skill wine that Ji Dong had not used for many years had returned to the world. Moreover, the first time it appeared, it was directly at the level of a super killing skill. During those days, in the 18th layer of the Earth's core, Ji Dong reminisced about himself and everything in the flaming bar. At the same time, he made all the jade of the earth of the Fire Lotus clan found into magic skill wine. Among the jade of the earth, the number of high-quality ones was relatively small. There were less than 40 pieces, so he made less than 40 beginner-level super killing skills. Unfortunately, Ji Dong's cultivation was not enough to make a super killing skill with the effect of Yin and Yang. It could only have a single effect, and it was very convenient for him to use super killing skills himself. Therefore, these super killing skill wine that he made were all area of effect killing skills. They were specially used to come to the Dark 5 Elements continent to cause destruction. At this time, there were at least 3,000 to 4,000 high-level magic masters below, and most of them had the cultivation of 5 or 6 crowns. Wasn't this the best time to kill the enemy? The greatest advantage of Ji Dong's magic skill wine was that it could be manipulated. As long as Ji Dong was willing, he could release it at any time after releasing it. Moreover, this magic skill wine would not produce any magical fluctuations before it exploded. Previously, Ji Dong did not let Ajin use the super killing skill because when Ajin used the super killing skill, there would definitely be a process of accumulating magical power. This process of accumulating magical power would definitely be seen by the Dark Magicians. As long as they could release multiple combination skills of the same attribute in time to block Ajin's attack, causing Ajin to only be able to consume magical power without being able to do anything, wouldn't it not be a loss? They were deep in the tiger's den, so of course, they had to conserve their magical power as much as possible in order to adapt at any time. However, using the magic skill wine was different. The 10 balls of red light that Ji Dong threw out were only the size of a fist. They were thrown from such a high altitude, and there was no magical fluctuation at all, so the dark magicians below did not notice them at all. When the 10 balls of red light scattered and landed in 10 different directions, Ji Dong used his powerful soul power to successfully activate them. Given Ji Dong's previous state, he had made the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon and his partners use the 5 elements Yin-Yang world precisely because he wanted to activate the 10 bottles of magic skill wine. 10 ultimate skills were unleashed at the same time. Not to mention that they had never seen such a situation before. In this world, be it the 5-element continent or the 5 elements continent, there were probably only a few people who had seen such a scene. In particular, these 10 ultimate skills were all area of effect. 9 rotations of the Flame Dragon would be 9 golden fire dragons. 10 such elementary ultimate skills would be like 90 fire dragons appearing brazenly and wreaking havoc in the huge darkness square. What a dazzling scene it was. The 90 fire dragons wreaking havoc at the same time completely cut off the possibility of the Dark Demon Army using multiple fusion skills to stop Ji Dong and the others from retreating. All that was left were earth-shattering screams. Sensing the stunned expressions of his partners, Ji Dong's expression did not change. He casually threw out another bottle of magic skill wine with a super killing skill. This time, he threw it directly into the big hole at the top of the castle. There were still 4 purple-robed high priests and a group of red-robed high priests inside. How could the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon leave so easily without blocking them? There was no time to admire this strange scene. The sacred evolution fire dragon swayed its body and shot out like an arrow. A thick fog was emitted and covered their bodies. In the blink of an eye, they had rushed thousands of meters into the sky. Under such circumstances, even if there were purple-robed high priests below, the magic skill attacks would not be able to catch up with them. As for whether the purple-robed high priests would dare to use their magical beast to chase after them, the answer was obvious. There were a total of 4 purple-robed high priests. If they did not have a death wish, it would be impossible for them to appear in front of everyone. A faint light flickered. A cold divine light appeared on Ji-dong's face. He clasped his hands in front of his chest. Every time the light in his eyes changed, the air would tremble slightly. Standing on the back of the sacred evolution fire dragon, he was like a demon god. At this moment, Embark had been released. She looked at Ji-dong with a completely different gaze. Chapter 604. Embark stared blankly at Ji-dong, the person she called uncle. She had mixed feelings in her heart. Before last night, she had never imagined that a person could be so powerful. After all, she had never seen what darkness Tianji looked like. In her heart, her father was already the most powerful person in the world. Last night, when Ji-dong had taken her into the vermilion burr bracelet, she had been extremely dissatisfied. She had felt that she had the ability to follow these light heavens and fight holy disciples. Even if she was not powerful enough, she would not be in any danger with her intelligence. However, as Ji-dong shared everything they had done with her, she understood that her little tricks were useless in front of a truly powerful person. At the same time, she understood that if Ji-dong had wanted to kill her, it would have been much easier than killing an ant. Even though she felt a little unbalanced, she felt much better. She could watch everything outside from the vermilion burr bracelet, which felt pretty good. It was as if she was watching them put on a show. However, when Ji-dong met Furong again and accompanied them to the dark inner castle, Embark could no longer remain calm. Her breathing seemed to stop, and she became extremely nervous. This was the most important place in the dark inner castle. As what happened next, Embark was completely stunned. Full attribute chaotic force was something she could not comprehend, and the strength that Ji-dong had displayed had completely exceeded her understanding of demon masters. When the 2 Saint-tier purple-robe high priest Hyoheim attacked, she really thought that Ji-dong was done for, and so was she. If that light devoured Ji-dong, how could it not devour the bracelet that contained her? However, what happened next made Embark feel surreal. Nothing was real. What Ji-dong had shared with her was not only the situation on Ji-dong's side, but also the situation on Jin, Lang Tianyi, and the 4 holy disciples led by Tianji. Although Ji-dong had cut off sharing with his companions in order to concentrate, he had still been using the power of his soul to keep an eye on them. Otherwise, he would not have been able to tell them what to do next immediately. Everything was fake. That was the only thought that Embark had at that time. She really could not believe that a demon master could do so many things at the same time. He had blocked 6 purple-robed high priests and dozens of red-robed high priests with just one attack, and even annihilated almost a third of the enemy's forces. Was he really human? He was a monster. However, just as Embark was certain that her judgment was correct and that Ji-dong was a monster, Ji-dong had already released her from the vermilion burr bracelet. At that time, the sacred evolution fire dragon had sped up and left the divine temple of darkness. Embark could clearly see the scene of the 90 golden fire dragons wreaking havoc below. If everything before was an illusion that Ji-dong had given her, then she had seen everything with her own eyes. How could it be an illusion? Meow Meow could not help but find it funny when she saw Embark's stunned expression. What? Are you scared out of your wits? It's not easy to see a scene like this. I wonder if you'll have another chance like this in the future. Embark snapped out of her daze and raised her hand. She subconsciously pointed at Hyoheim and asked Meow Meow in a low voice, "Big sister, is Uncle really human? Is he a monster?" Although Embark's voice was very soft, everyone present was able to clearly hear everything she said. Not only did no one refute her words, Du Exiner, Meow Meow, and Jin even nodded in agreement. A smile bloomed on Tianji's lips. Although Du Ming and Lang Tianyi did not dare express their opinions so clearly, it was clear from the confusion in their eyes that even now, they still felt that this was a bit unreal. Yao Qianshu stood there in a daze, as if he did not hear what everyone said. He only muttered, "What a loss, what a great loss. How many darkness crystal crowns would there be?" Hearing his words, everyone couldn't help but feel moved. That's right, not to mention how many dark magicians they had killed before. Just the release of Ji Dong's last 10 primary ultimate skills at the same time was unknown how many low-level dark magicians would be devoured. If they could obtain all the darkness crystal crowns, they would probably be able to increase the overall cultivation of the heavenly stem holy disciples. Ji Dong stood there motionlessly, while Chen Xishuan stood behind him. She held onto his arm and constantly transferred her magic power into Ji Dong's body. Although her magic power was almost exhausted, she would immediately transfer it to Ji Dong every time she gathered a bit. They did not activate the teleportation formation because it was no longer necessary. If they could not let the other party know about their various abilities, it was naturally better to save some energy. After the sacred evolution fire dragon rose thousands of meters into the sky, it identified a direction and flew rapidly. For hours later, it had already flown more than 500 kilometers. Only then did it slowly land in a mountain range and find a quiet place to land. Everyone jumped off the sacred evolution fire dragon's back, but when they landed, they were surprised to find that Ji Dong was still standing on the sacred evolution fire dragon's back, without moving. What happened to Ji Dong? Miao Miao asked in shock. When Ji Dong had changed his ultimate technique, only Chen Xishuan and Yao Qianshu had been there. Only they had seen everything that Ji Dong had done. Chen Xishuan had been helping Ji Dong recover, while Yao Qianshu had been immersed in his reluctance to part with the dark crystal crown. Thus, no one had explained it to everyone. Now that they had arrived at a safe place, everyone had relaxed. Only then did they remember that incredible scene. However, before they could ask Ji Dong seemed to have a problem. Chen Xishuan sighed. She wrapped her arms around Ji Dong's waist and floated up into the air, landing on the ground. Only then did everyone see that Ji Dong's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. His expression was extremely unsightly, but his eyes were still resolute. "Qian Shubauer, Du Ming, help me heal Ji Dong's injuries. His injuries are very serious." Although Chen Xishuan's voice was very soft, everyone could hear the pain in her voice. Yao Qianshu woke up and hurried forward with Du Ming and Lan Bauer. Wood type and water type were the best at healing. At this time, they were naturally needed the most. With a wah sound, Ji Dong had already spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, he slowly closed his eyes. The heavenly stem holy disciples were silent and stood in a circle around Ji Dong. At this time, their bodies and minds were relaxed. They could completely imagine why Ji Dong had done what he had done earlier. He had forcefully held on until now, before his injuries acted up. Before this, he had been suppressing his injuries all along. As the heavenly stem holy ruler and the leader of this trip, Ji Dong shouldered almost all the heavy responsibilities on his shoulders. Although he had been seriously injured earlier, in order not to affect his companion's fighting spirit and not to let the enemy see any flaws, he had persisted and not allowed himself to fall. He had even used 11 primary ultimate killing techniques to block the pursuers after leaving the inner castle. He had done the best he could. Looking at Ji Dong, who had fallen into Chen Xishuan's arms, the heavenly stem holy disciples were no longer just admiring him. Their eyes revealed a bit of respect. Ji Dong was a true leader. Although he was younger than most of them, everything he had done was irreplaceable among the heavenly stem holy disciples. The dual wood and dual water started healing at the same time. Under Chen Xishuan's guidance, they began to heal Ji Dong's injuries. When they injected their magic power into Ji Dong's body, they realized how bad Ji Dong's condition was. Ji Dong had a saint-level physique and a defensive inner armor like the holy flame armor. It was almost difficult for him to be injured. However, the more it was like this, the injuries he sustained would be extremely serious. Yao Qianshu and the others discovered that most of the meridians in Jidong's body were somewhat messed up. Although these tough meridians had not really ruptured, they were blocked, tangled, and chaotic everywhere. Moreover, his internal organs had been greatly shaken and had left their original positions. If it had been someone else who had suffered such serious injuries, even if they did not die, they would have fainted long ago. However, Jidong had persisted until now. If he had not drunk a mouthful of the 1,000-year source of life and had the protection of the core of life, he would probably have died long ago. At this time, no one asked what had happened in the inner castle. They were all silently praying for Jidong in their hearts. Even Imo was no exception. She had clearly seen everything that had happened at that time. She did not know what saint-level strength was, but at that time, she clearly saw that Jidong had blocked the powerful strength of the 6 purple-robed high priests who had joined forces. The heavenly stem saints were healing Jidong here, while the darkness temple was already in chaos. At this time, the 4 surviving purple-robed high priests were standing in front of the forbidden room of darkness Tianji. Their faces were ashen, and their bodies were even trembling. Looking at the messy forbidden room and the huge hole beside them, none of them spoke because they did not know what to say at all. Jidong was too ruthless. Before leaving, he had thrown the jade of the earth into the inner castle. Not only had it been used to block these people, but he had also directly thrown the magic wine made from the jade of the earth into the forbidden room of darkness Tianji. In the forbidden room, 6 secret formations of darkness had all been destroyed. At the same time, all kinds of precious materials, books, scrolls, and some secret treasures of darkness Tianji had been destroyed. Although the heavenly stem saints could not take much away, the amount that had been destroyed was extremely shocking. It could be said that in the entire forbidden room of darkness Tianji, less than 1/10 of the things could be said to be intact. Respected purple-robed high priest, the casualties have been calculated. A red-robed high priest hurriedly walked in from outside. His expression was not any better than the purple-robed high priest's. In fact, it was even worse. The gazes of the 4 purple-robed high priests fell on him. The fire attribute high priest, who was the leader, asked in a low voice, "How is it?" Hearing his question, the red-robed high priest clearly fell silent. He looked at the purple-robed high priest with an expression that the purple-robed high priest did not want to see the most. "Speak. Since it has already come to this, we can only ask for forgiveness from Lord Heavenly Mystery. The secret room has been destroyed to this extent. What worse news can there be?" The fire attribute high priest sighed with a bitter smile. The red-robe high priest nodded and said, "I have just done a count. There are 263 4-crowned great demon masters that have died. Because most of them lost their magic power due to the powerful chaotic force, they could not rush over to support the inner castle, so the number of casualties is relatively low. The total number of 5-crowned, 6-crowned, and 7-crowned high priests exceeds 1,500. 27 red-robed high priests died in battle, and 2 purple-robed high priests died in battle. Although the 4 purple-robed high priests had a certain degree of mental preparation, they still almost fainted after hearing the report of the red-robe high priest. It should be known that not counting the 100,000 reserve dark demon army guarding the periphery of the darkness temple, the true dark demon army inside the darkness totaled 100,000 people. This time, the loss actually exceeded 1/5, and in terms of overall strength, it was close to 1/3. In just a short night, this was simply unbelievable. The red-robed high priest swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said, "The main casualties occurred in the last 10 super killing techniques that appeared at the same time. Until now, we still do not know how these 10 super killing techniques came about. There was no sign before, and when we discovered it, the power of these 10 super killing techniques had already been released. The great demon masters of all levels did not have time to use multiple combination techniques to resist, so say no more." The purple-robe high priest, who was the leader, shouted angrily. It was no longer possible to describe all of this as humiliation. From the summary of the situation at that time, the total number of enemies who had entered the darkness temple was less than 10. However, it was these 10 people who had achieved such a terrifying number of casualties. Even if they were saints, this had completely exceeded the psychological endurance of the leaders of the Darkness Temple. Taking a deep breath, the leading purple-robed high priest smiled bitterly and said, "I will apologize to Lord Tianji and take all the blame on myself. In the future, please take care of my family." With that, he turned around and bowed deeply to the other 3 purple-robed high priests. This was not something that could be done at all. These purple-robed high priests had an internal ranking. Once something happened, the responsibility would definitely be from the top to the bottom. So he simply took the initiative to take the responsibility and even let the other 3 help him take care of his family out of gratitude. They were very clear about the fury of the Dark Tianji. This time, it was impossible for him to escape. Chapter 605. After an entire day and night, Ji Dong finally woke up from his coma. His body was much better. The ancestral dragon's bloodline of the Earth Dragon ancestor had a strong regenerative ability. With the help of the core of life, the source of life, and the 4 heavenly stem saints who were good at healing, Ji Dong's body had already recovered 60% to 70%. During the time when Ji Dong was unconscious, none of the other heavenly stem saints went to rest. Instead, they all silently guarded Ji Dong. They all knew very well that if it wasn't for Ji Dong, they might not have been able to escape unscathed. Ji Dong had shouldered everything by himself. After healing Ji Dong to a certain extent, Chen Xishuan said something simple to her companions. She said, when facing those 6 purple-robed high priests, Ji Dong had at least 10 ways to stop their ultimate technique. But why didn't he do that? Why? The reason was very simple. It was because time was becoming more and more disadvantageous for them. Outside, Jean and Lang Tianyi were under too much pressure, while the 5 people on the top floor of the castle could not do anything about the 3 Class 10 magical beasts either. If time dragged on, it was very likely that they would fall into the trap. As a result, Ji Dong had chosen a method that no one could understand to directly deal with the power of the supreme killing move. It was also that strike that had caused him to be heavily injured. Taking a deep breath and slowly exhaling, Ji Dong felt that the blood in his body had started to circulate faster and his mana was circulating. Although he was still a little weak, his body felt much more comfortable. "Thank you, everyone." Ji Dong's gaze swept across his companions before stopping on Chen Xishuan. He smiled and nodded. Heavenly Prophet sighed. "We should be the ones thanking you. If we hadn't succeeded, you wouldn't have been injured." Ji Dong shook his head. "Let's not talk about this. We're partners and brothers. Moreover, we didn't have a better choice in that situation. After all, the Darkness Temple is the place where the forces of the 5 elements continent are the most concentrated. The longer we stayed there, the more danger we would be in. I could feel that the array in the castle had started to recover its mana. Moreover, who knows how many secret weapons the Darkness Temple could send to deal with us in a short time. We had to end the battle quickly. Therefore, I had no other choice. You don't have to blame yourselves. This time, everyone played their part. Our victory in this battle didn't belong to any one person, but to all of us." Yao Qianshu knew Ji Dong the earliest, so he spoke to him without any scruples. He couldn't help but ask, "Ji Dong, I've always wanted to know how you did it back then. I don't understand what you did at that time at all. That was a top-notch ultimate skill, and it was completely locked onto you. Even with your level of soul power, you can't remove such a level of locking, right? Tell me quickly, or I'll suffocate to death." Ji Dong smiled and said, "When I kept waving my palms forward, did you think I was crazy?" Yao Qianshu's expression suddenly became a little strange, but he still nodded honestly and said, "I did feel that way." Chen Xishuan, who was at the side, sighed and said, "Not only him, I also thought you were crazy at that time because I had no idea what you were doing." Ji Dong turned his head to look at Chen Xishuan and said with a wry smile, "So, you're prepared to use your body to block that top-notch sure-kill skill for me when it reaches me, right?" As soon as he said this, the Heavenly Stem Holy Disciples' expressions changed at the same time, especially Ajin and Lon Bauer, who had designs on Ji Dong. They lowered their heads, unconsciously. Chen Xishuan treated Ji Dong like this. So how could they have any chance? Moreover, even Chun Sichuan like this was still unable to move Ji Dong's closed heart. Chun Sichuan smiled faintly and said, "The armor of eternity should be able to help you block part of the attack. At least it should be able to save your life." What she did not say was that as long as she used the armor of eternity to block that top-notch ultimate skill for Ji Dong, she would have the ability to activate the 9 natal red lotus seeds in Ji Dong's body. That could only be achieved when Ji Dong was completely unguarded. She could not activate it easily when she was by his side. Only when Ji Dong saw her block the attack for him and was shocked for a moment could Qin Sichuan unleash the true power of the natal red lotus that had been hidden. Ji Dong withdrew his gaze from Chun Sichuan because he really did not dare to look at her. To him, Chun Sichuan was also something he could not understand. He could not understand why she was so good to him and why he always wanted to repay her, but in the end, he would only owe her more. This was not a good feeling for Ji Dong, because he had to admit that in his inner world that was filled with the figure of the flaming bar, he had still been squeezed out of it by Chun Sichuan. At that time, my palm strike was naturally not meaningless. What I used was the derivative skill of the God Exterminating Strike, God Exterminating Wall. The God Exterminating Wall has the ability to block any attack for a moment, just like a wall of the 5 elements. It was released in a very special way. Even I, the user of the God Exterminating Wall, wasn't completely clear about it. But one thing is for sure. Although the God Exterminating Wall consumed a certain amount of energy when it was released, it did not emit any magical wave. At that time, I was constantly releasing God Exterminating Wall after God Exterminating Wall, making these God Exterminating Walls overlap. Even I did not know how many layers I had added. The God Exterminating Wall was tilted towards the top of the inner castle. Chun Sichuan said angrily, "Did you think that you would succeed at that time?" Ji Dong smiled and said, "Yes, I knew that I would succeed at that time. There is no doubt about that, but I did not know how much it would cost. Because, not long ago, I felt that the God Exterminating Wall had a certain refractive effect, and I named this refractive ability after multiple layers of God Exterminating Wall as God Exterminating Mirror. Although I paid a great price this time, I had a whole new understanding of the God Exterminating Wall. The next time I use it, I won't be in such a difficult situation. Now, I am more and more convinced that the God Exterminating Strike is the so-called godly skill of creation. This time, using the God Exterminating Mirror also helped me to reach the 7th realm of the God Exterminating Strike. This is a good thing." Ji Dong did not say much about the danger at that time. The Heavenly Stem holy disciples all knew that he did this on purpose so that they would not worry. However, they all knew how much pressure he had to bear when he chose to use the God Exterminating Mirror. Seeing the strange gazes his companions were giving him, Ji Dong smiled and said, "All right, let's not talk about Du Ming. Bao let me see what kind of divine items you've obtained. We've gained quite a lot from this trip. Not only have we obtained 2 divine items, but we've also killed quite a few Dark Demon Masters. With every Dark Emperor Demon Master we lose, the pressure on our continent will lessen a bit when the Sacred War begins." Although everyone knew that he was deliberately avoiding the topic and didn't want to continue the previous topic, no one said anything. Du Ming said respectfully, "Teacher, I got the Ice God Spear." As he spoke, he raised his right hand, and a dazzling black light instantly extended from his palm. As the light flashed, it instantly elongated. A simple and unadorned black spear appeared in Du Ming's hand, its surface engraved with many demonic runes. This spear looked very strange. Most of it was black, but the 7 inches of the spear's tip was white like ice. A dense chill immediately spread out after it appeared, causing the surrounding temperature to plummet. Without a doubt, this was a 9th Water Divine weapon that focused on attack. With the Ice God Spear in hand, Du Ming's aura was clearly different. His demonic fusion cultivation had already reached level 79, and now that he had this divine weapon, breaking through to the 8 crowns was just around the corner. Lan Bauer came to Du Ming's side and said softly, "Gue Water, divine weapon. Soft water, purple silk." As she spoke, A long purple silk appeared out of thin air. Dazzling light instantly surrounded Lon Bower's delicate body. Unlike the ice god's spear, which was focused on attack, it was clear that Lon Bower's divine weapon, soft water purple silk, had the ability to change into a myriad of forms. As for its specific power, it would have to be tested in actual combat. Jidong's eyes shone brightly, and he said, "Good. We've finally gathered all the divine weapons of the divine disciples of light. We finally have the ability to fight against the divine disciples of darkness." At this point, he slowly stood up and looked in the direction of the divine temple of darkness. He said, regardless of whether or not Dark Secrets has returned to the divine temple of darkness, he should know what happened there. We're about 1,000 miles away from the divine temple of darkness. With his level of cultivation, it's very likely that he'll be able to find us. Everyone, take out all the dark crystal crowns you've collected. We'll absorb them and leave this place. Hearing Jidong's words, Yao Qianshu said gloomily, "If only we had all the dark crystal crowns we killed at the end. There were over 1,000 of them. If we could absorb them all, we'd all level up at least." Among everyone, the one who was most eager to increase his mana was not Du Ming, who had the lowest level of cultivation, but Yao Qianshu. The reason was very simple. His companions already had divine weapons that they could use, but his divine weapon could only be activated after he reached the 9th crown. How could he not be anxious? His mana was already at level 86, and he was not too far away from level 90. Although they did not obtain the last batch of dark crystal crowns, there were still several hundred of them after everyone took them out. Ajin's harvest was the most abundant. She had nearly 200 dark crystal crowns, followed by Lang Tianyi. They were guarding outside and had killed the most dark demon masters. Although Jidong did not obtain many dark crystal crowns, their quality was unique. There were 10 8-crown dark crystal crowns, and more importantly, there were 2 Earth-type 9-crown dark crystal crowns. Lang Tianyi was a bit better, and he controlled his emotions, but Misty did not care. She looked at the Earth-type 9-crown dark crystal crown in Jidong's hand and smiled. She grabbed it. Although this dark crystal crown could not directly increase her cultivation by 1 level, it would be no problem for her to increase it by half a level. It had to be said that the 2 Earth-type Violet Robe High Priests that Jidong had killed were both over level 95. Such a precious dark crystal crown was not something that could be obtained easily. Because the dark demon masters they killed were different, the attributes of the dark crystal crowns could not be evenly distributed. The ones who benefited the most this time were naturally Misty and Lang Tianyi, but the others' gains were not bad. Only Mo, who was a dark demon master, could not absorb these dark crystal crowns. Seeing that everyone was sitting there and absorbing the dark crystal crowns, Mo walked to the side alone. She looked a bit lonely. Tianji came to her side and asked with a smile, "What are you thinking about?" Mo glanced at him and said, "Yun, do you know? Originally, I did not believe that you were heavenly stem holy disciples of the 5 Elements continent. There was even a period of time when I thought that you were dark demon masters that Tianji had captured from the 5 Elements continent. In order to destroy our resistance alliance, they made you pretend to cooperate with us." Tianji smiled and said, "Now you don't think that way, right? Our proof of allegiance should be enough." Emor stuck out her cute little tongue and said, "Of course it's enough. The total number of devil masters you killed and your overall strength are stronger than our resistance against the Heavenly Mystery Alliance. How could it be used to deceive us? Daddy will be very happy. With your help, we finally have a chance to fight against the Darkness Temple." Seeing the excitement in Emor's eyes, Tianji couldn't help but rub her head and say, "At your age, you should be living a carefree life." Emor pulled Tianji's hand away and turned around. She glared at him and said, "You're going to call me a girl again, right?" Seeing her angry look, Tianji couldn't help but smile and say, "Isn't that the case?" Tianji was tall and slender. He was about the same height as Jidong. Emor was petite and had to raise her head to look at him. She said, "Of course not. I'm already a big girl. I can carry out missions for the organization." Tianji laughed and said, "Okay, okay. You're a big girl. Can you change? But you look quite cute when you're full of luck." Embark pouted and said, "Yun, I thought you were a good person. So you're bullying me too. You're the same as Uncle Demon." Tianji said helplessly, "You already called Ji Dong an uncle. In terms of age, I'm older than him. Am I not an uncle?" Embark shook her head and said, "Of course not. You're different from him." Tianji asked curiously, "Why are we different?" Embark said, "Because your eyes are different. Your eyes are very penetrating, but his eyes are full of vicissitudes. He doesn't look like he's in his 20s at all. Don't you think so?" Chapter 606. The speed at which Ji Dong absorbed the darkness crystal crown was very fast. It had to be said that Ji Dong had foresight. The main reason why they could absorb the mana in the darkness crystal crown for their own use and replenish their own mana was chaos. With the chaos origin, no matter what element they had, absorbing mana was effortless. They could easily complete the entire absorption process. This was also necessary to absorb a large amount of darkness crystal crown. Otherwise, it would take at least a month to absorb the huge amount of mana in a 9-crown darkness crystal crown without the help of the chaos origin. Now, only 6 days had passed when Miao Miao and Lang Tianyi finally completed the absorption. In 6 days, Ji Dong's body had completely recovered. He had also absorbed about 40 dual fire darkness crystal crowns. Although there were no 9-crown darkness crystal crowns, there were still a few 8-crown darkness crystal crowns. Logically speaking, Ji Dong was an ultimate dual fire elemental, so he could absorb more darkness crystal crowns than his companions. However, what made him a little depressed was that his absorption was the worst. The other heavenly stem saints had obvious improvements, but after absorbing dozens of darkness crystal crowns, Ji Dong only felt a slight increase in mana. There was still a long way to go before he reached level 89, let alone level 90. With the help of the Pearl of Thick Earth, Wolf Tianyi's cultivation had already reached level 92. At this level, it was extremely difficult to raise one more level, and Miao Miao had only increased by half a level. The most obvious effects came from the lowest level Du Ming and Lan Bauer. Both of them had just obtained a divine artifact. Not only did they absorb the crystal crown, but they also had to go through the process of fusing with the divine artifact. With the support of the enormous magic power in the dark crystal crown, Du Mingxing broke through 8 crowns during the entire fusion process, and his cultivation directly rushed to level 82. Although it did not have the super powerful effect of directly raising 5 levels like the Pearl of Thick Earth, it was still a great surprise to him. Lan Bauer also directly increased her magic power by 1 level, and the Heavenly Stem Saints all felt that these short 6 days were almost equivalent to about a month of their usual cultivation. After listening to his companion's increase in levels, Ji Dong could not help but shake his head helplessly. He said, "I don't know if it's because I have the ultimate dual fire attribute, but it has instead restricted the effect of absorbing the darkness crystal crown. After absorbing so many dual fire attribute crystal crowns, I only feel that my mana has not increased by even 1/10 of 1 level. I'm still far from level 89. Not being able to break through to 9 crowns soon was a huge problem for him. For the Heavenly Stem Saints, breaking through to 9 crowns meant that their overall mana level would increase by a huge level. This was especially true for Ji Dong. He had the ultimate dual fire attribute. Once he broke through to 9 crowns with the power of the Fire God Sword, even without the help of the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon and the Eclipse Phoenix, it would not be a problem for him to deal with an ordinary early stage Saint Powerhouse. But as he watched his companions getting closer and closer to 9 crowns, his own cultivation stagnated after reaching level 88. How could Ji Dong not be depressed? In addition to Jin and Lang Tianyi, who had already broken through to 9 crowns, Qin Sichuan's cultivation had quietly reached level 89. She only needed to break through one last time. Yao Qinshu's cultivation was already close to level 87. This time, he had absorbed a lot of first wood element darkness crystal crowns and directly advanced. He was 1 level away from Ji Dong. Miao Miao was the same as Ji Dong, also at level 88. But judging from the speed at which she was absorbing the darkness crystal crowns, she would definitely surpass Ji-dong and reach 9 crowns earlier. This was really a bit depressing for Ji-dong, who had always been ahead in terms of cultivation. It doesn't make sense, Ji-dong. Normally, you can absorb 2 attributes of darkness crystal crowns and magic elements at the same time. Your cultivation should be improving faster than us. Why do you feel like you've stagnated? Yao Qinshu said, puzzled. Ji-dong said helplessly, I don't know what's going on either. With my current cultivation, no matter how good my skills are, it's impossible for me to compete with dark divination. The difference in magic power is just too great. With his cultivation at the peak of the Saint Realm, his total magic power is probably dozens of times greater than mine. With his cultivation at the peak of the Saint Realm, he can use a large number of top-notch ultimate skills. Even if I have everyone's support, I can only use one at most. Moreover, apart from not having the wood attribute, it can be said that he has all the other 8 attributes, and has also comprehended the primal chaos profound of the water, fire, earth, and metal attributes. If we really fight, even if we join forces, I'm afraid that we won't be his match. Maybe it's because of your fire god sword. Chen Xishuan had to remind Ji-dong. She didn't want Ji-dong to get lost in the process of cultivation. Fire god sword? Ji-dong was stunned for a moment and looked at Chen Xishuan. Chen Xishuan nodded and said, Do you remember that you used the fire god slash once in the inner castle of the Dark Temple? You also used it against the 3-legged golden crow, but I feel completely different. The fire god slash you performed this time is not only powerful, but it also doesn't consume as much of your magic power as before, so you still have the strength to use the God Destroyer mirror. Even if you use up all the magic power stored in the formation when you use the God Destroyer mirror, it's still more economical than before. Ji-dong was very smart. After being reminded by Chen Xishuan, he immediately came to a realization. His eyes lit up, and he said, You're right. The feeling of the Fire God Sword is indeed different. Not only does the magic power decrease when using it increase, but the attack power also increases. Moreover, when breaking through the 5 elements boundary set up by the red-robed high priests, it seems to have some special ability. If it was in the past, it might not have been able to break through their 5 elements boundary. After all, it was cast by 10 all-attribute 8-crown magic masters, but it couldn't withstand a single blow from the Fire God Slash. At the same time, it even broke through a diamond defense. You mean that the slowing down of my cultivation has something to do with the Fire God Sword? Chen Xishuan said, when everyone obtained a divine weapon, they could increase their magic power a little faster with the help of the divine weapon. However, you were the first person to obtain a divine weapon, but after you obtained the Fire God Sword, did your cultivation speed increase faster or slower? Ji-dong thought about it carefully and said, At least it didn't speed up. Overall, it definitely slowed down. I always thought that it was because my magic power had reached a high level, so the speed of my cultivation would naturally slow down. Chen Xishuan shook her head. No, it's definitely not like that. All of us have reached 8 crowns or above, but ask everyone, has the speed of cultivation slowed down? It shouldn't be, because we are heavenly stem saints, not ordinary magic masters. I don't think so, because we are heavenly stem saints, not normal wizards. The situation you described does indeed exist for normal wizards, but we already have ultimate mana. Although the amount of mana we need increases with every increase in level, in reality, the speed at which we absorb mana is also continuously increasing. At least before we reach the level of 9 crowns, our cultivation speed should not decrease. This is also one of the greatest advantages of heavenly stem saints. Moreover, in terms of effort, you are stronger than any of us. You have also cultivated for the longest time among us. Previously, we even stayed in the core world, the most suitable place for you to cultivate for such a long time, but your mana has only increased very little. This is clearly not normal. Ji-dong's heart skipped a beat, and he said, Could it be that all of this is related to the Fire God Sword? According to Si Xian's guess, it's very likely that the Fire God Sword has been absorbing your mana to replenish itself. In other words, the Fire God Sword itself isn't complete. After you used the divine fusion art to fuse it into your body, it has been relying on your power to replenish itself and gradually perfecting itself. The increase in power this time is the best proof. Clearly, your fire god sword is developing in a more and more perfect direction. Only when it completely recovers its original nature will it be able to assist you, instead of constantly absorbing the mana you produce during cultivation or even your chaotic force. Ajin said, "That should be the case." Jidong nodded and said, "What you said makes a lot of sense. Back then, when the fire god sword fused with the fire god sword, it should have required a large amount of Jade of Heaven. But after I helped the flaming bar kill the killing god Shupness, I used the fire god sword to seal Shupness' consciousness in the sword, and the fire god sword completed the fusion process. At that time, my mind was completely in a mess, and I didn't think too much about it. Now that I think about it, the fire god sword sealed Shupness meant that it had a sword spirit, but it didn't replenish the Jade of Heaven it needed during the fusion process. If that's the case, then it's correct to say that the fire god sword is constantly absorbing my magic power. The core of my ultimate dual flames is the fire of chaos, which has the same attribute as the Jade of Heaven." As he spoke, Jidong slowly raised his right hand. With a thought, a red light flickered, and the fire god sword that was glowing a strange red gradually appeared in his hand. The heavenly stem, saints, subconsciously retreated a little. Although the red light on the fire god sword didn't emit any heat, it made them feel a chill from the bottom of their hearts, and they didn't dare to approach it. Especially after the fire god sword appeared, the dense murderous intent made everyone tremble unconsciously. At this moment, Jidong released the fire god sword to a length of 4 feet and carefully observed this dual fire attribute divine weapon. There was no doubt that in terms of quality, the fire god sword was the best among them. The reason was simple. It was a fusion of 2 fire attributes, and could even be said to be of the chaotic fire attribute. Naturally, it was superior to the other divine weapons. Back then, the Flaming Bar had mentioned that the fire god sword was the weapon of the Lord God, and was much more powerful than ordinary divine weapons. The 4 feet long fire god sword emitted a gentle red light. This red light was very similar to the red lotus heavenly fire released by the Flaming Bar, but there were many differences. Compared to the red lotus heavenly fire, its color was deeper. Until now, Jidong still couldn't fully understand the characteristics of this red light. The entire body of the sword seemed to be carved out of rubies. There were no patterns, and it was crystal red all over. Jidong casually waved at a small hill in front of him. Immediately, the fire god's sword emitted a dazzling red light that was more than 10 meters long. With a flash of light, a ravine silently appeared in the center of the small hill. It had been directly cut open. However, what Jidong had used was not the fire god slash at all. He had merely waved it casually. "My golden bangle of extinction is trembling," Jean suddenly said. At the same time, she released the golden bangle of extinction. Although the golden bangle of extinction was in her hand, it was trembling slightly and emitting a low, buzzing sound. "My golden fiend, divine sword 2. Do exine," cried out in alarm as she summoned her sharp golden fiend divine sword. Perhaps it was because her cultivation was lower, but the golden fiend divine sword was trembling even more violently than the golden bangle of extinction. Chun Sichuan said in a deep voice, "The divine artifact is afraid. It seems to be afraid of the light of the fire god's sword." Her eternal armor was also summoned. Although it did not tremble, without Qin Sichuan activating it, the mysterious patterns on the eternal armor burst forth with a green light, forming a light barrier that enveloped Chun Sichuan's body. The other heavenly stem saints also summoned their own divine artifacts. Without exception, all of these divine artifacts had an abnormal reaction. Only Yao Qinshu's situation was a little better. After all, his green bead had yet to reveal its true appearance. It was only emitting a flickering light, and the frequency of it had increased a little. Jidong realized that in that attack, just now, he did not pour any magic power into the fire god sword. He had completely relied on the divine sword itself to casually wave it, But the red light had appeared directly, and the fire god sword did not absorb his magic power. Ji Dong could vaguely feel that when he swung that sword, the fire god sword seemed to have produced a powerful suction force, and the fire elements in the air instantly fused into it. That attack just now was equivalent to me using a killing move, but did not consume any of my magic power. It is indeed different. It seems that I usually rely too much on the god-slaying strike, and I don't pay enough attention to it. I didn't expect the fire god sword to have changed so much. When I first obtained it, even if I summoned it, it would absorb a large amount of my magic power. Xian and Jin are right. This fire god sword should have evolved after absorbing my magic power. However, even if it is a main god-level divine artifact, it shouldn't have caused your divine artifact to react. After all, I have no ill intentions towards you. Chun Sichuan said, the fire god sword itself is indeed a main god-level divine artifact. But don't forget that it also has the consciousness of a second-level divine artifact sealed as a sword spirit. Chapter 607. Don't forget, it also has the divine sense of a level 2 god sealed as its sword spirit. Chen Sichuan's simple words were like morning bells and evening drums. Ji Dong immediately came to a realization. That's right, this fire god sword was no longer the original fire god sword. Back when Flaming Bar evaluated it, it was before it had sealed Shupness. Given Shupness's level of cultivation, even Flaming Bar could only fight him to a draw in the 18th layer of the core, which was the most suitable for him to fight. Shupness himself had said that he was the strongest level 2 god, so how could the fire god sword be the same after sealing the divine sense of such a powerful god? Ji Dong, let me take a look. Tianji came to Ji Dong's side. He didn't have a divine weapon, so he was much more at ease facing the fire god sword than the heavenly stem holy disciples. He slowly closed his eyes, and the third eye on his forehead opened. The eye that was as deep as the starry sky quietly opened and looked at Ji Dong's fire god sword. Ji Dong also slightly restrained the light on the fire god's sword to avoid hurting Tianji. The eye of Tianji emitted a layer of gentle light. This light was colorless and very similar to sunlight. It swept across the fire god's sword. Tianji grunted and took a step back. The eye of Tianji instantly closed. Ji Dong hurriedly put away the fire god sword and stepped forward to support him. Tianji, are you all right? Ji Dong asked with concern. Tianji shook his head and slowly opened his eyes, which were filled with joy. I'm fine. It's just that the red light was a little dazzling. I can't look at it for too long. Ji Dong, I saw it clearly. Sichuan was right. Your fire god sword is probably different from before. What did you see? Ji Dong asked nervously. Even he didn't understand what kind of changes had happened to the fire god sword. Tianji said solemnly, evolving. Evolving? Ji Dong looked at Tianji in surprise. Tianji nodded. That's right, evolving. I saw a band of light with the eye of Tianji. One part was red, while the other was blank. The red part was about 60% complete, as if it had just passed a boundary. If I'm not wrong, this should be why you feel the fire god sword is different from before. In other words, it's very likely that after devouring Shupness divine sense and absorbing your primal chaos flames, it has evolved. It's about 60% complete now. Ji Dong stared dumbfoundedly at Tianji and murmured, What should we do now? It has evolved to 60%. If that's the case, unless it completes its evolution, it'll be impossible for me to break through to the 9th crown. Tianji smiled bitterly. I'm afraid that's the case. The fire god sword is too powerful. With your current level of cultivation, you can't reverse or stop its evolution. As long as it's in your body, it will definitely absorb your energy to evolve. It's already so powerful now. Once it completes its evolution, its power will definitely be astonishing. Ji Dong said helplessly, No matter how astonishing its power is, my level of cultivation isn't high enough. I can't unleash its full power. That's the biggest problem. Tianji said, Then there's only one way. Abandon it and increase your strength. The fire god sword is a divine artifact, after all. It's an external object. If we go back to the radiant sink continent, you can temporarily seal it and cultivate mana. That should be possible. Jidong immediately shook his head. I can't. The fire god's sword has Shupness's divine sense sealed within it. Although Shupness doesn't seem to be able to contend against it, that's only because my soul force is supporting the fire god's sword. If I seal it and Shupness breaks through the fire god's sword, then we'll be in big trouble. I'm afraid I'll be killed by it. After all, I attacked it before. If it kills me, it won't be a violation of the rules of the divine realm. Moreover, it's impossible for me to separate from the fire god's sword. It has been with me for so long and has long since fused with my bloodline. With the addition of my soul force, it can be said that it has already become a part of my body. Although it is constantly absorbing my mana, I'm certain that without it, not only will my cultivation not increase at a faster rate, it will also have the opposite effect. Tianji said, then there's nothing you can do. Even if you know that it will absorb the mana produced during your cultivation, you still have to hold on to it. Right now, I can only hope that its evolution can be completed as soon as possible. Chun Sichuan said, it's a good thing that the Vulcan's sword can evolve. None of us know to what extent it can evolve, but when it completes its evolution, it will definitely be extremely powerful. It can definitely be used as a weapon against Dark Heaven secrets. Moreover, now that we know that it's affecting Jidong's cultivation, Jidong, you can also change your cultivation in the future. You don't need to cultivate solely for yourself like before. We can do our best to help it evolve, so that it can complete its evolution as soon as possible. We still have a year and a half. If the Vulcan's sword can complete its evolution and your cultivation breaks through to the 9th crown, then when we face Dark Heaven's secrets, we might not necessarily be powerless. Jidong's eyes lit up. Sichuan is right. Since we already know why my cultivation speed has slowed down, then I can make some changes when I cultivate. The Vulcan's sword definitely needs the chaotic flames to evolve. There's no doubt about this. When I cultivate, the chaotic flames are naturally produced. I'm increasing my own mana. If I want to increase the Vulcan's sword's evolution speed as soon as possible, then when I cultivate in the future, I'll do my best to convert my mana into chaotic force to support it. This way, its evolution speed will increase. Jean said, there's an even more direct method. Jidong glanced at her and said almost at the same time, the Jade of Heaven. It was the Jade of Heaven. Although the Jade of Heaven did not contain the chaotic flames, it was the purest form of chaotic force. Previously, when there were 2 Vulcan swords, the fusion method required the addition of the Jade of Heaven. Clearly, it could completely accept the chaotic force in the Jade of Heaven. Du Ming said regretfully, if I had known, I would have given all the Jade of Heaven I got from the foolishly rich merchant association to teach her to upgrade the Vulcan's sword. Jidong smiled and shook his head. You can't say that. It's also very important for you to comprehend the profound truths of primal chaos. I'm not the only heavenly stem saint. The sacred war between the 2 continents requires us to work together. It's best for everyone's strength to increase together. Moreover, we still don't know if the Jade of Heaven is effective. I still have 2 pieces left. Let's test it out now. As he spoke, Jidong released the Vulcan's sword again. Last time, he had helped his companions awaken the profound truths of primal chaos and had used up most of the Jade of Heaven. He only had 2 pieces left. Taking out one of the Jade of Heaven, Jidong thought for a moment before tossing it into the air. The Vulcan's sword stuck to the Jade of Heaven with the spine of the sword. Immediately, a strange scene occurred. When the Vulcan's sword came into contact with the Jade of Heaven, the Jade of Heaven instantly vaporized and turned into a gentle, milky white stream of air. It circled around the Vulcan's sword before slowly sticking to it. The white stream of air only existed for a few seconds before disappearing into Jidong's Vulcan sword. Jidong did not feel anything. On the surface, the Vulcan sword did not seem to have changed. Without Jidong saying anything, Tianji had already opened his eye of divine secrets and looked at the Vulcan sword. The evolution rate has increased by about 5%, Tianji said excitedly. 5%? In other words, if I want to complete the rest of the evolution, I'll need a total of 80 pieces of Jade of Heaven without the assistance of cultivation. Jidong's expression was a little unsightly. He had not expected the Jade of Heaven to require such a huge amount of Jade of Heaven to evolve the Vulcan sword. At first, he had thought that the previous evolution rate of 60% was too slow. After all, it had been 3.5 years since he had sealed Shupness. However, from the looks of it now, these 3.5 years had not been wasted. That 60% was equivalent to 120 pieces of Jade of Heaven. In reality, Jidong's cultivation in the past 3.5 years could be said to be unprecedented. Apart from his own hard work, he had also absorbed the blood of the Earth Dragon ancestor, the primogenitor dragon. Back then, the Earth Dragon ancestor had wanted to directly raise his cultivation to above 9 crowns. It was not as simple as a saint physique. Later on, he had cultivated in the core world for over a year. The environment there was undoubtedly the most suitable place for the Vulcan's sword to evolve. With Jidong's own nourishment and the help of these fortuitous encounters, the Vulcan's sword had increased by 60%. Of course, a small portion of this 60% was obtained after coming to the Darkness continent and devouring the Darkness Crystal Crown. Yao Qinshu said, "Since the Vulcan sword requires such a huge amount of Jade of Heaven to evolve, shouldn't we make a trip back to the Five Elements continent and ask for more from the foolishly rich merchant association? That fatty Zhou, Xiao Xiao, must have some in stock." Miao Miao looked at Yao Qinshu disdainfully and said, "Are you stupid or not? Who said that the Five Elements continent cannot have Jade of Heaven? What's the point of going back? Didn't we come to the Five Elements continent to stir up trouble and rob those fellows from the Divine Temple of Darkness?" As he spoke, Miao Miao flipped his wrist and threw 2 balls of white light in front of Jidong. "Here you go. I got them from the Forbidden Room of Dark Tianji. Back then, I only got these 2 pieces in a short time. But this is enough to prove that the Five Elements continent definitely has these things." Jidong reached out and caught them. Weren't they 2 pieces of Jade of Heaven? He immediately used the Vulcan's sword to absorb the rest of the Jade of Heaven. Yao Qinshu sighed and said, "What a loss, what a loss." As he spoke, he shook his wrist, and 5 pieces of Jade of Heaven flew towards Jidong. Miao Miao widened his eyes and said, "F***CK. Those Jade of Heaven were placed in different directions in the Forbidden Room of Dark Tianji. You actually took 5 pieces in such a short time? Are you even human?" Yao Qinshu said proudly. "Haven't you heard of this brother's nickname? Medicine cures diseases, but money saves fated people. This is called reaching out from under the coffin and asking for money. If I had more time, I would have emptied that place." Jidong looked at Yao Qinshu and shook his head helplessly. He said, "You," but he was not going to be polite with Yao Qinshu. The 5 pieces of Jade of Heaven were absorbed into the Vulcan sword again. At that time, aside from Tianji, there were 4 other people on the top floor. Other than Yao Qinshu and Miao Miao, it was Lan Bauer and Du Ming. But at that time, both of them were aiming for the divine weapons of their respective attributes. Naturally, they did not have time to take the Jade of Heaven. But with these 7 pieces and the 2 pieces that Jidong already had, the evolution of the Vulcan sword had reached 64.5%. It could be said that it had taken a big step forward. Miao Miao is right. Didn't we come here to cause destruction? Let's just rob the Dark Magician. Although the effect of the Crystal Crown's absorption is far inferior to the Jade of Heaven, it is still useful. In less than a year and a half, I believe that the Vulcan sword will definitely evolve. The evolution of the Vulcan sword had increased by 4.5%. Jidong was in a good mood. Tianji smiled and said, "I'm looking forward to what kind of power the evolved Vulcan sword will display." Du Hixener giggled and said, "It would be best if it could directly cut that Dark Tianji in half." Chen Sichuan Hioheim asked, "What should we do next?" Jidong said, "Although we've achieved great success in this trip to the Darkness Shrine and obtained 2 Water Element God artifacts, our whereabouts have definitely been exposed. The Heavenly Secrets of the Darkness knows that we've entered the Darkness Shrine continent, so they'll definitely try to find us. As a result, we have to be even more careful. The first thing we have to do is obviously to go to the Heavenly Secret Alliance where Mo and and the others are fighting against. With this, they'll trust us, and we can send Emo back as well. The Secret Resistance Alliance had been able to survive for so long, so they naturally had their own abilities. Even without what Emo had seen and heard, Ji-dong believed that they should have known what had happened in the Darkness Temple. If they still couldn't gain their trust, then there was something wrong with the Secret Resistance Alliance. Hearing that Ji-dong wanted to send her back, Emo was not happy at all. She was almost 16 years old, and in all the years she had been with him, she hadn't been as excited as these few days with the Saints. Pouting, Hyoheim said, "Uncle Demon, are you in such a hurry to chase me away?" Ji-dong looked at her in shock and said, "Uncle Demon?" Chapter 608. How did I become Uncle Monster? This was the first time Ji-dong had heard someone call him that. When he had left the Divine Temple, he had been so heavily injured that he hadn't even heard what Emo had said. Hearing Emo call him that in front of everyone, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, there was nothing he could do to this little girl. Emo said, "Of course you're Uncle Monster. Otherwise, how could you do things that only monsters can do? If I go back and tell my father what you've done, he probably won't believe me. That's why I'm going to continue following you and see what kind of abilities you have." Ji-dong laughed. "I remember that you didn't want to go with me no matter what I said. You even hated me to the point of gnashing your teeth. What? It's only been a few days, and you've already changed your mind. Could it be that there's someone among us that's especially attractive to you?" While saying that, Ji-dong intentionally looked at Tianji. This time, it wasn't just Emo who blushed. Tianji's face was even redder. "Master, I didn't." He panicked. He had even called the master in front of everyone. How was he still acting like Tianji? Emo snorted. "Uncle Monster only knows how to spout nonsense. Umph. In any case, I'm not leaving. I'm going to follow you and supervise you." Ji-dong shook his head helplessly. "Whether you leave or not, take me to see your father or someone from the Resistance Alliance first. Your father said that after this matter is done, you'll take us to the Resistance Alliance." While saying that, Ji-dong threw the map he had bought to Emo. Emo took the map and looked at it. She then determined where they were and said, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go." Ji-dong summoned the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon, and everyone flew on it. Under the release of the clouds, the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon soared into the sky. In order not to attract attention, everyone had been using the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon to fly after entering the Dark Five Elements continent. The Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon could use the clouds to conceal itself, so it was naturally not easy to be discovered. Just as the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon took off and Emo gave him a direction, Ji-dong's heart suddenly jumped. He sat cross-legged on the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon's back and slowly closed his eyes. Chun Sichuan and Tianji could clearly feel that Ji-dong was releasing his soul power in one direction. After a while, Ji-dong opened his eyes. He patted the Sacred Evolution Fire Dragon and said to Emo, "We won't go find your father for now." Emo was shocked. "Uncle Monster, are you going back on your word?" Ji-dong pretended to be angry. "Don't call me Uncle Monster. Why would I go back on my word? I just have something to do before we go find your father." Emo blinked and looked at Ji-dong in confusion. Ji-dong contacted his companions with a thought. Of course, Emo wasn't one of them. No matter what, Emo was still an outsider. This was a secret, so Ji-dong couldn't let her know. Moreover, this girl could read lips. Even sealing her hearing wouldn't work. Soul communication was the best method. "I just contacted Senior Brother." Ji-dong's simple words shook the hearts of the Heavenly STEM disciples, especially Meow Meow. She stared at Ji-dong with wide eyes, waiting for him to continue. Ji-dong smiled and said, "Senior's brought us a piece of good news. Hey Tianji already knows that we broke into the Divine Temple of Darkness and took away 2 water element god artifacts." Meow Meow frowned. "How is this good news?" Ji-dong said, "Let me finish." Although he already knows about it, he didn't immediately appear in the Darkness Temple. Our previous judgment was right. There is indeed a Dharma formation in the Darkness Temple that can teleport Darkness Tianji back in a short period of time. However, there's one thing that we are extremely lucky about. The Dharma formation that can teleport Darkness Tingy back is in the hall outside his forbidden room, which is also the place that was destroyed by my top-notch superkiller skill. Therefore, even with Darkness Tingy's cultivation, it will take him some time to rush back to the Darkness Temple. That day, after we destroyed the Dharma formation, the Darkness Temple took 5 days to send the news to Darkness Tingy. In other words, Darkness Tingy only found out about this yesterday and has just started his journey back. Senior brother just told me that Darkness Tingy definitely won't be able to reach the Darkness Temple within 2 days. What do you think we should do? After listening to Ji Dong's words, the eyes of the heavenly stem saints lit up. Dark Tianji wouldn't be able to return in a short time. And this time, they didn't have to worry at all that Dark Tianji would suddenly appear in the Divine Temple through the formation. How could they let go of such a good opportunity? A smile appeared on the lips of every heavenly stem saint at the same time. Only Mo, who was kept in the dark, looked at them in a strange state of confusion. What are you laughing at? Mo asked curiously. She was naturally asking Tianji. Tianji smiled and shook his head. Without Ji Dong's permission, he naturally wouldn't tell Mo. Ji Dong said, "If we go to the Divine Temple again, what do you think, Mo?" What he wanted to hide from Mo was Fury Spy. It was naturally fine to go to the Divine Temple and tell her, you still want to go to the Divine Temple? Are you crazy? After what happened last time, the Divine Temple will definitely increase their security. Mo looked at Ji Dong in shock. Ji Dong said indifferently, "So what?" It was a simple sentence, but it showed his great confidence. Mo looked at Ji Dong in a daze and said, "Uncle, are you really a demon?" Ji Dong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He looked at her and said, "If I'm a demon, then so be it." The sacred evolution fire dragon had already turned around and was flying in the direction of the Divine Temple. Yes, what else could make Tianji angry and even lose his composure more than attacking the Divine Temple? Even the heavenly stem saints didn't expect that they would actually have a second chance. Ji Dong said to the heavenly stem saints, "This time, we no longer have a clear goal in the Divine Temple. Everyone can go all out and try to destroy, kill, and obtain the Darkness Crystal Crown. This time, our main target is no longer the Darkness Inner Castle. The Inner Castle's array must have been reactivated and won't give us another chance. Our main goal is to kill the Darkness Magicians in the Divine Temple. If possible, it would be best to find the place where they stored the Darkness Crystal Crown. Previously, we left so many Darkness Crystal Crowns for them. If we can find them, it will undoubtedly be of great use to us." Eagerness appeared on every bright light holy disciple. As Duming's cultivation had broken through to level 80, the bright light holy disciples were all powerhouses at least 8 crowns. They had also tasted the sweetness of the Darkness Crystal Crown. This time, they were clearly mentally prepared. In the distance, the dark forest outside the Divine Temple was already in sight. The sacred evolution fire dragon slowly landed. The heavenly stem saints were not in a hurry at all. They were waiting for the sun to set. Night was the best time to take action. Ji Dong asked Lang Tianyi, "Tianyi, if we start sneaking underground from outside the forest, how much mana will it consume?" Lang Tianyi said, "It depends on how deep we dive. The deeper we dive, the more mana will be consumed. If it's 200 meters like last time, my mana will be exhausted when we reach the Divine Temple's moat." Ji Dong's eyes flickered. "We're not crossing the moat this time, so of course we don't need to go that deep. As long as we don't get discovered by the Darkness Magicians and patrolling soldiers on the ground, 10 meters is enough." Lang Tianyi said, "Then there's no problem. With the help of the staff of the Earth Goddess, our mana consumption is almost negligible when we sneak into the periphery of the Divine Temple. The speed at which we replenish our mana is enough to support us." Ji Dong nodded and said, "All right, thank you for your hard work. We'll start taking action in the evening." In the dark forest outside the Divine Temple, the defense had at least doubled. A large number of soldiers were patrolling the area continuously. It was obviously not easy to go over directly. Instead of taking the risk of being discovered and wasting time, it was better to go underground. At the very least, There would not be any problem walking underground before entering the divine temple. The sun was setting, and when it appeared on the horizon in the distance, the heavenly stem saints had already quietly sunk into the ground under the light of the pearl of thick earth. As they were only moving at a depth of 10 meters, their speed was much faster than when they had dived 200 meters previously. They went straight in the direction of the divine temple. Who would have thought that in less than a week, when the divine temple was at its most heavily guarded, they would return? Outside the divine temple, it was still filled with black fog. Jidong gave each heavenly stem saint 2 magical wine made from the jade of the earth. However, these were made from the jade of the earth, which was of relatively low quality. All that could be released was the sure kill skill, Fire Dragon Spin, which was a sure kill skill that could release a fire dragon to launch an attack. This thing was used to block the enemy at critical moments. Jidong taught everyone how to use it, and told them that they only needed to use their soul power to activate it. Then, he let Lang Tianyi and Miao recover their mana. They dived deep underground again, crossed the moat from a depth of 200 meters, and entered the interior of the divine temple. They were not in a hurry to get out of the ground. Instead, they stopped 30 meters away from the ground. Jidong, Chun Sixuan, and Tianji worked together to release their soul power to investigate the outside. The last time they came to the divine temple, there were almost no patrolling mages in the entire divine temple. After all, the outer dark forest was heavily guarded, and there were saint-level soul scanners inside. There was no need to worry at all. However, it was different this time. Through soul detection, Jidong discovered that there were at least hundreds of dark magicians patrolling the square and between the various buildings of the divine temple. They all looked like they were on guard. Moreover, the magicians with 6 crowns and above were all riding their own magical beasts. It could be said that the defense was extremely tight. There were at least 5 red-robe high priests in charge of patrolling the square. In the inner castle of the divine temple, not only was the chain bridge put away, but the entire inner castle was also emitting a faint, colorful light. Clearly, many defensive arrays had been activated. This time, the divine temple truly gave off a feeling that it was impregnable. Ajin, it's up to you, Jidong said to Ajin. Ajin nodded. His figure flashed, and he broke out of the ground. The place they chose was still in a dark corner. Although there were a large number of patrolling dark magicians outside, it would take a while for a few of them to reach this place. Ajin quietly appeared, and his figure was hidden in the darkness. When the team of 5 dark magicians patrolled over, he did not make a sound at all. He had already fallen to the ground, and his life was gone. The combined soul power of Jidong and the other 2 at the peak of the saint level completely concealed the situation of the massacre. The heavenly stem saints also broke out of the ground and hid in the shadows. In fact, although it had been nearly 7 days since the righteous light saints attacked the divine temple, until now, the divine temple had not figured out how Jidong and the others had entered. No matter how they thought about it, they did not think that Jidong and the others could appear here without alerting anyone. The only thing they could determine was that there must be a saint-level soul saint among the righteous light saints. Only then could they hide from the detection of the saint-level soul power of the divine temple. At this moment, in the inner castle of the divine temple, 8 purple-robe high priests were sitting together and discussing solemnly. The 4 purple-robe high priests who had gone out on official business had rushed back in the shortest time possible and did not dare to leave rashly. Of course, they would not think that they were not responsible for the attack on the divine temple just because they were not there. On the contrary, the 4 purple-robed high priests were more or less out of personal affairs. The purple-robed high priest sitting at the head of the table was someone that Jidong and the others had not seen the last time they came. He was dressed in a gorgeous purple robe, was tall, and had white hair and beard. The mana waves emitted from his body were obviously more majestic than the other purple-robed high priests. He was the strongest purple-robe high priest in the divine temple, and his cultivation was as high as level 98. At least in terms of level, he was only 1 step away from the saint level. He was also the strongest in the divine temple apart from Darkness Prophet. Lord Prophet will be back in about 3 days. This matter cannot be resolved by relying on someone to take the blame. Everyone, let's discuss what we should do. As he spoke, he glanced at the purple-robed high priest who had a fire attribute. It was obvious that he was mainly talking to him. Chief High Priest, we were not prepared for this at all. Everyone is responsible, but the key problem is how those righteous light saints were able to come to our divine temple. Chapter 609. The Dark Temple, the sixth floor of the inner castle, the High Priest conference room. We are not shirking our responsibility, but this time it was really an accident. If someone else was in charge of the inner castle, I am afraid it would be the same. The purple-robed high priest of first would said with a wry smile. The purple-robed high priest of the third fire element said, "Yes, the holy evil island is blocked by the red lotus heavenly fire, and even Lord Divine Mystery can't get through. How did these saints of light heavenly stem get here? We didn't expect such a powerful enemy to come to us at any time, so we were naturally unprepared. For thousands of years, our darkness temple has never suffered such an attack. Moreover, the strength of these saints of light heavenly stem is completely beyond our expectations, especially the one who possesses the ultimate dual fire magic power. He can actually refract the top super killing skill, which caused such serious consequences. Moreover, he actually has so many super killing skill scrolls. We were caught unprepared, so the chief high priest of the gunmetal department sighed and said, "You are right. At that time, even if I was here, I might not have been able to do anything. Even if all 10 of us were here, the strongest attack we could launch was only a top-notch sure kill skill. The key was that all the defense and attack formations in the inner castle were paralyzed, which made us too passive. I really didn't expect that the saints of light heaven had already mastered the chaos attribute. However, it is useless to say these things now. Lord Destiny will not listen to our explanation. Have the people we sent out found the whereabouts of the saints of light heaven?" The purple-robed high priest of Ninth Water Department frowned and said, "There is no discovery yet. Besides, with their cultivation that can block top super killing skills, what can we do even if we find them? Even if we join forces, we may not be able to keep them here. I have to admit that the light radiant saints entering our 5 elements continent at this time will definitely bring us a lot of trouble. I have already notified all the cities on the continent within 10 days. The painted map has also been sent down. Once they find traces of them, report to us immediately." The purple-robed high priest of Gue Water Department was an ugly old woman. She screamed, "The red lotus heavenly fire on the holy evil island can't even pass our Lord Fate. How did these saints of bright heavens get here? Is there any mystery of the red lotus heavenly fire that we haven't figured out yet?" The chief high priest said in a low voice, "No matter what, we have to defend the temple first. Before Lord Tianji comes back, we can't afford to make any mistakes." The purple-robed high priest of the third fire faction said, "Last time, they took advantage of a loophole and caught us off guard. We will not give them such an opportunity again. The inner castle's defenses are fully activated, and the strength of the patrols has increased several times. Even a mosquito entering the range of our temple will be discovered immediately. If these daring fellows dare to come again, with the temple's array, they will not be able to leave." Just as the purple-robe high priest of the third fire faction finished speaking, a violent rumble was suddenly heard, accompanied by a piercing alarm. The 8 purple-robed high priests stood up at almost the same time, with shock in their eyes. It's at least a sure kill level attack. Could it be that the radiant heavenly stem saints have really come again? The Fuhua series' purple-robed high priest exclaimed. A cold light flickered in the chief high priest's eyes. Do they really think that there is no one in the darkness temple? For us, their reappearance is the only chance to atone for our sins. As long as we keep the radiant heavenly stem saints, we will be innocent. The eyes of the 8 high priests were exuding a strong, murderous aura. If the radiant heavenly stem saints dared to come again, they undoubtedly did not take them seriously. Once darkness Tianji returned, the 8 of them would definitely be severely punished, and this was their only chance. Whether it was the anger in their hearts or the fear of darkness Tianji, they had to do their best to keep the radiant heavenly stem saints. The chief high priest shouted in a low voice, "Activate the darkness chaos defense array and the soul-searching array of the temple. This time, we must make sure that they will not be able to leave." That's right, the rumble outside was made by the radiant heavenly stem saints. The defense of the darkness temple had indeed exceeded their expectations. After Ajin easily killed the 5 radiant heavenly stem saints, everyone quietly appeared inside the darkness temple. However, they were discovered after only 10 seconds. It did not mean that the peak saint-level soul power that Jidong, Chun Sixuan, and Tianji had jointly released was not enough to conceal them, but the detection method of the darkness temple had changed. The purple-robe high priests were not fools. Previously, when the radiant heavenly stem saints successfully sneaked in, they understood that the radiant heavenly stem saints must have some ability that could shield them from the soul detection of the 4 sentry towers in the inner castle. Therefore, they made certain changes to the array. Although they were still scanning the entire darkness temple, they were not scanning the enemies, but the vital signs of the dark magicians who were in charge of patrolling. Before every patrolling wave of dark magicians started their patrol mission, they had to first go to a specific place outside the inner castle to scan their own condition before starting their patrol mission. It had to be said that the use of various arrays in the darkness temple was far beyond the reach of the radiant heavenly stem saints in the 5 elements continent. So Ji Dong and the others did not expect such a situation to happen. The 5 dark magicians were killed, and their vital signs disappeared. In just a few seconds, the scanning saint-level soul detection discovered them. 4 strands of soul power condensed into one in the air, and then directly fell on the place where the 5 dark magicians disappeared. Dazzling light gathered from all directions, accompanied by the sound of the alarm, and the dark magicians rushed over like a tide. Being discovered so quickly caused the holy disciples of the Battalion of Light to shiver. However, they were not afraid at all. This was because they had no target this time, so they had less to fear. Only then would they be able to display their strength in battle. Without waiting for Mo to object, Jidong immediately put the little girl into the vermilion bird bracelet. This place was not suitable for her. The soul power connected all the partners and accurately transmitted the situation of the darkness temple to everyone. Jidong said in a low voice, "Split up and attack. The range of activity is 100 meters. Don't be too far away. Take advantage of the fact that they have not gathered and kill a group of them first. Remember, try to conserve your mana as much as possible. Don't waste too much." As he spoke, Jidong was already the first to rush out, flying in a certain direction. This time, he directly released his Fire God Sword and Divine Flame Saint King armor. Since the Fire God Sword could display such a strong power while conserving mana, wasn't it suitable for this group battle? After all, the God-slaying blow could only be used in close combat. A large number of dark magicians rushed over. Jidong had already rushed forward like a bolt of lightning, the Fire God Sword in his hand sweeping out. The 4 dark magicians that rushed over hurriedly urged their mana, trying to block Jidong's attack. The 8 purple-robe high priests in the inner castle also heard the rumbling sound. Without any suspense, the 4 dark magicians were instantly turned into ashes in front of the Fire God Needle. They didn't even have time to completely release their skills. Rushing forward, Jidong's Fire God Sword was like the Grim Reaper's scythe. The flying serpent flash propelled his body to the peak of his speed. The Fire God's sword shot out a shocking rainbow, and a red light that was more than 10 meters long swept across the square of the Dark Shrine. Killing these low-level magic masters couldn't be any easier for Jidong. Even if he didn't use his large-scale skills, he wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow with the Fire God Sword. In the sky, the dark magicians on flying magic beasts attacked Hyoheim from the sky, trying to coordinate with the dark magicians on the ground to restrict Jidong. Unfortunately, they couldn't catch Jidong's figure at all. With their soul cultivation, it was impossible to lock onto Jidong. Occasionally, Jidong would leap up and sweep out, immediately turning a dark magician into ashes along with his mount. The Fire God Sword's tyrannical power was undeniable. After evolving to 60%, The fire godsword's power was obviously much stronger than before. As he used it, Jidong discovered that among the attributes the fire godsword came with, there were 3 attributes: shield break, armor break, and magic break. Even if it was a defensive magic skill at the level of sure kill skill, when the fire godsword didn't infuse any magic power into it, it couldn't block its attack at all. Those magic weapons were like tofu. This feeling was really too satisfying. There was no need for any technique at all. With the super speed of the flying serpent flash and the 10 meters long rainbow that the fire god sword spat out, everywhere it passed was bound to be a pile of corpses. It felt like cutting melons and vegetables. Almost everywhere the red light passed, not even the corpses were left. Only the darkness crystal crown fell to the ground. In just a few breaths' time, there were already dozens of middle and low-level dark magicians who had died under the fire god sword. Compared to Jidong, the attack power of the other Heavenly Stem's holy disciples was slightly weaker. Yao Qianshu was in charge of protecting Tianji and didn't leave his side. Tianji, on the other hand, used his advanced saint-level soul power to release an area of effect soul suppression, greatly reducing the reaction and release speed of those middle and low-level magicians. Chen Xishuan, on the other hand, followed behind Jidong. What could be seen were pieces of dark green crystal leaves constantly flying out from her body. Any fish that escaped the fire god sword would get a leaf. It wasn't as powerful as Jidong's, but Chen Xishuan's attack targets were mainly in the air and on the 2 flanks. She tried her best to reduce the harassment of the magicians from these 3 directions to Jidong, so that Jidong could use his full firepower and increase his killing power to the maximum. Miao Miao and Lang Tianyi worked together because Jidong had said to conserve as much magic power as possible. Therefore, the cooperation between the 2 of them was extremely simple and direct. With the staff of the Earth Goddess, a large-scale swamp spell was released, sucking in the Devil Master who was rushing over. Lang Tianyi used the Pearl of Thick Earth to smash down a rock. With the power of the Pearl of Thick Earth, even if it was an ordinary rock, its power would still be extremely shocking. Moreover, the Saints of Light and Sky were all people with extreme magic power. They had the advantage of suppressing these middle and low-level magicians. 5 or 6 crown-level magicians would be completely wiped out in at most 3 waves of falling rocks. Only some 7 crown-level magicians could barely block it. But with the restriction of the staff of the Earth Goddess, it was extremely difficult to get close to them. When Jin rushed out, he didn't forget to say to Du Exin beside him, "Follow me." After all, Du Exin cultivation was relatively weak. She was also of the metal element, so she naturally had to take care of her after receiving Jidong's instructions. Du Exin had already seen Jin's killing methods. Following her closely, she could naturally learn a lot. Jin didn't use the golden ring of extermination. He held the eunuch maker in his right hand and transformed into a 5-foot-long blade in his left hand. He didn't use any practical skills, just relying on a speed that wasn't inferior to Jidong's, as well as his terrifying sharpness. He continued to slaughter. Although he wasn't as fast as Jidong, in terms of killing speed, he was only second to Jidong. Following Jin, Du Exin clearly felt like she had nothing to do. Jin's speed was too fast, and it was impossible for her to keep up completely. She could only barely follow behind and pick up some fish that slipped through the net. With the sharpness of her golden fiend divine sword and the domineering power of the extreme Gung metal demon power, no low-level dark magician could block it. Du Exin was also very direct. Regardless of whether the other party attacked or defended, she would directly slash at them with her sword, and the battle would end. As for Lan Bauer and Du Ming, they had just obtained the divine weapon, so they wanted to give it a good try so that they could better fuse with the divine weapon. The Ice God Spear was the main attack, while the Ruoshui Purple Silk was the main defense. Although their killing speed wasn't fast, they were stable. The attack and defense worked well together, and they would never give any enemy a chance to take advantage of them. Every time they attacked, they would definitely take away a dark magician's life. It could be said that in the short period of time that the Darkness Temple's inner castle reacted, hundreds of dark magicians had already died in the hands of the heavenly stem saints. Just as Ji Dong was freely using the fire god's sword, he suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of danger. He subconsciously raised his head to look at the sky. At this moment, the thick black fog that enveloped the darkness temple changed. A total of 100 rays of light rose from the moat outside the darkness temple at the same time. These 100 rays of light belonged to 10 different attributes, and each of them was as thick as a pillar. What troubled Ji Dong the most was that these 100 rays of light were all ultimate mana of the 10 attributes. At the same time, complicated mage-weds slowly lit up beneath their feet. These huge mage-weds almost enveloped the entire Darkness Temple, including the circular square and all the buildings within the Darkness Temple. Although they weren't targeted, the sudden appearance of the vast mana waves still caused the heavenly stem saints to freeze. They all looked at the sky in shock.